Hey guys, tonight we are stepping out of your cozy bedroom and into the blinding sands of Central Asia, where the Silk Roads snake across deserts that seem determined to make sure you never reach the next town alive. The air is bone dry, the horizon endless, and the caravan bell clangs with the promise of another weary day. You probably won't survive this, but let's pretend you will, if only for the sake of the story. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I'd love for you to drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you're listening. It's always fascinating to see this little sleepy community stretch across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake at first light in a dusty caravanserai, a kind of ancient motel for merchants who somehow thought crossing hundreds of miles of sand was a good business plan. The animals grunt and shift, ropes creak as loads are tightened, and you trudge out with the others, still half asleep, toward another horizon that looks suspiciously like the one behind you. The desert doesn't do variety. Your breath fogs faintly in the chill dawn because, contrary to popular belief, deserts can be freezing at sunrise. You wrap your wool cloak tighter, trying not to think about the coming heat that will make you regret every extra layer. Camels groan like teenagers forced out of bed too early, their long necks swinging as they kneel reluctantly for loading. The caravan leader barks orders, his voice muffled by a cloth wound across his face. You learn quickly. Everything here is measured, timed, and deliberate. Depart late, and the sun will roast you alive before noon. Mainstream history, fact. Ancient caravans usually set out at dawn, or even earlier, precisely to avoid the punishing midday sun. Quirky tidbit? Some merchants carried small brass alarm gongs to clang through the courtyards of caravanserais, a kind of medieval snooze button that nobody really appreciated. Historians still argue whether those alarm gongs were common practice or more of a rare eccentricity. Either way, you're awake, trudging into sand that already sneaks into your sandals like it has a personal vendetta. The first few steps are deceptively easy. The sand is cool, firm, packed by the night chill. But as you shuffle forward, the loads creak behind you. Bales of silk, jars of pepper, a crate of porcelain so fragile you're convinced it'll be dust by lunchtime. Some poor mule has a cage with a squawking parrot that refuses to stop yelling. Apparently, someone thinks parrots sell well in Samarkand. The sun edges higher, painting the dunes in gold, and your body wakes enough to start complaining. Your shoulders ache from carrying even your meager pack. The horizon stretches like an infinite beige canvas, and for a moment you swear you're walking in place, never getting closer to anything. The only rhythm is the soft pad of camel feet and the occasional bell tied around a mule's neck, its dull clang hypnotic enough to put you back to sleep standing up. You try talking to the man next to you, but his face is wrapped in cloth and he only grunts. Communication out here is an economy, save words like "you save water." He does, however, offer you a piece of dried apricot, which you chew gratefully. Sticky sweetness in a world of dust. The desert begins to stir with life. Tiny lizards dart across the sand, tails whipping like calligraphy strokes. A vulture circles overhead, already optimistic. You tighten your scarf, thinking uncomfortably about what exactly it expects to feast on. Somewhere in the distance, a jackal yips, a sound so thin it might be a hallucination. As the sun climbs, you begin to sweat, each drop stinging your eyes with salt. You remember hearing that desert travelers sometimes dab crocodile dung mixed with oil on their skin as a kind of sunscreen. You look down at your arm, baking under the light, and wonder, would you rather burn or smell like a swamp reptile? Historians still argue whether this was actually widespread practice or just one bizarre reference in a medical text, but either way, you're not volunteering. A gust of wind scatters sand into your teeth. You spit, grimacing. It feels like chewing on ground glass, and you realize with dread this will not be the last time today. You pull your scarf higher over your mouth, copying the veterans. Their eyes alone are visible, squinting against the glare, scanning ahead for wells or danger. You imitate them clumsily, but every movement feels exaggerated, every gulp of breath hard-won. By midday, the caravan halts under a scrap of shade cast by a rock outcropping. Camels collapse into the sand with theatrical sighs, their legs folding like broken furniture. You collapse too, grateful for even a handspan of shadow. A water skin passes around, each person taking only a mouthful. You savor yours like nectar, but it evaporates from your tongue instantly, leaving you thirstier than before. You catch yourself thinking back to your cozy room, your cool glass of tap water, your fan humming. Civilization feels like a fever dream. Here, survival is reduced to sand in your shoes, the next sip of water, the hope your camel doesn't decide to die on you halfway to the next stop. Still, as the breeze picks up and the horizon wavers in heat shimmer, you can't help but feel a strange calm. The desert doesn't pretend to be easy. It just is, vast and indifferent, and in some odd way, that honesty is comforting. You pull your cloak around you, close your eyes, and drift half asleep to the sound of camels chewing cud like bored old men at a tavern. The camp stirs again, and you stand, sand clinging to your cloak. The camels grunt as they're prodded back onto their knees, ready to haul what feels like the weight of an empire. The loads creak and sway, a mobile bazaar packed into bundles, jars, and boxes. Tonight, if all goes well, you'll still be trudging with them, surrounded by the smell of sweat, spices, and whatever unfortunate goods ended up lashed together too closely. Packing is not a casual affair. A bale of silk cannot sit beside jars of sesame oil, unless you like your fabric smelling like fried dumplings for eternity. Fragile porcelain must be cushioned between softer goods, and merchants argue endlessly about which order will save their profits and their sanity. You watch as two men debate the best spot for rhubarb roots, a prized medicinal cargo shipped westward. One insists it must be kept dry, the other claims shade is more important. Historians still argue how carefully caravans actually separated such goods, but today you can see the anxiety etched into every gesture. Mainstream fact: records from Tang Dynasty China describe elaborate packing lists for caravans, specifying which goods to prioritize and how much could be reasonably carried by camels or mules. Quirky tidbit: some merchants even carried live tortoises, not for eating, but for good luck, claiming their slow patience helped steady the caravan's fate. You imagine the tortoises strapped down, staring at you with unblinking wisdom, while parrots squawk from another crate. The desert is a zoo of misplaced ambitions. You help lift a heavy bundle of spices onto a mule. Immediately, the scent of pepper and cinnamon wafts into your nose, both delightful and sneeze-inducing. You stifle a cough because you've seen how quickly laughter spreads when someone sneezes pepper dust into their beard. One old man mutters that at least the pepper will keep bandits away. They'll choke before they rob us. You're not entirely sure he's joking. Meanwhile, silk bales are stacked meticulously, their glossy sheen hidden under rough wrapping cloth to keep dust and greedy eyes away. Every merchant watches their bundles like parents guarding toddlers at a playground, checking knots, retightening straps, and then checking again. A single frayed rope could mean weeks of profit shattered into sand. You hear the complaints of the animals, louder than the merchants. Camels sway under the shifting weight, knees shuddering before they straighten to their full awkward height. Horses flick their tails, already impatient. Mules bray as if announcing that this is all a terrible idea. You can't disagree. The caravan leader inspects each load like a conductor reviewing instruments before a symphony. He taps a rope here, tugs a strap there, grunts approval. You think for a moment that his main skill is worrying. Yet in this world, worrying saves lives and fortunes. The humor of it all becomes clear when you notice a jar of honey lashed dangerously close to a bale of raw wool. You imagine the sticky disaster waiting to happen and suppress a laugh. The merchant responsible swears loudly that it will hold. You've learned already, optimism in the desert is usually punished. By the time the last bundle is tied down, the sun has risen higher and your stomach growls. Someone passes around dried dates, sweet little nuggets of energy that stick to your teeth. You chew them slowly, staring at the camels chewing even slower. It's a contest you will never win. One scholar in the group, clearly unused to manual labor, fusses over a crate of scrolls he insists must not be crushed. He claims they contain sacred Buddhist sutras being carried west, their words more valuable than all the silk combined. Others roll their eyes. Historians still argue whether caravans really mix trade goods with sacred texts so casually, or if this is just a romantic exaggeration from later chronicles. But here he is, glaring at anyone who so much as brushes against his crate with a sandal. As you sling your small pack back onto your shoulders, you notice how different every load smells: spice, silk, parchment, animal hide, oil, and sweat, each one tugging at your nose like a disorganized perfume shop. The desert will blend them all together soon enough, sanding every scent into the same gritty dust. Finally, the leader waves his staff, and the caravan lurches forward again. A bell clangs on a mule's neck, signaling the reluctant start of another stage. You fall back into rhythm, footsteps crunching on sand already warming under the sun. Your shoulders ache just from watching the camels strain, but there's a strange satisfaction in knowing everything needed for survival and for profit has been strapped down, balanced, and double-checked. You march, surrounded by the creak of leather straps, the rustle of cloth, and the muffled curses of merchants realizing they forgot to pack their favorite snack in an easy-to-reach place. Somewhere behind you, a parrot shrieks in protest. You wonder what language it will be speaking by the time it reaches the next market. The caravan presses onward, the desert yawning open in every direction like a giant oven waiting for the fire to be stoked. Your boots crunch against the sand, and you hear the steady swish of camel tails swatting at invisible flies. It seems like you're simply walking across nothingness, but then you notice something subtle. The path isn't random. It winds, curves, and dips along lines invisible to your untrained eye. The caravan leader is already making the first big choice of the day, whether to steer you all toward the mountain passes or brave the open desert plain. Every route across the Silk Roads comes with its trade-offs, and none of them sound particularly inviting. The mountain pass promises cooler air and the trickle of glacial streams, but it also hides bandits behind jagged rocks and carries the constant threat of landslides or sudden snow, even when the valleys below are baking. The open desert, on the other hand, offers fewer ambushes, but it stretches long and flat under a punishing sun, broken only by mirages that mock your thirst. Historians still argue whether merchants preferred the faster but riskier routes or the slower ones where survival odds nudged ever so slightly higher. Mainstream historical fact. During the Tang dynasty, official records describe caravans leaving Dunhuang and splitting into two major paths, one hugging the mountains, the other skirting the Taklamakan Desert's southern rim. Both were lifelines, but also graveyards, depending on luck. Quirky tidbit. Some routes became so associated with death that travelers left offerings of dates, coins, or even little clay figurines at crossroads as if bribing the desert itself to let them through. You pause as you pass one such offering, a clay horse half buried in the sand, and wonder if it's wise to make your own donation, maybe your least favorite sandal. The debate among the merchants grows louder. Some mutter that the mountain road is suicide this late in the season. The snow could trap you all. Others argue that the desert's heat is more lethal, that water skins will run dry before the next well. You don't get a vote, of course. You're just trudging along, trying not to think about the fact that both options end in exhaustion, blistered feet, and sand in every imaginable crevice. The caravan leader finally makes the decision. He tilts his staff toward the low hills shimmering in the distance. Mountain route it is. You groan quietly, but you also feel a flicker of relief. At least the mountains offer shade now and then, and you can dream of icy streams instead of boiling mirages. Hours pass as you slog forward, following narrow goat trails that cut upward. The climb burns your thighs, and you silently curse every merchant who decided their porcelain vases absolutely had to make this trip. The camels groan louder, stumbling on loose rocks, but their padded feet seem more sure than yours. A mule slips, nearly sending a bale of silk tumbling into a ravine. Half the caravan gasps, as if the loss of fabric were a greater tragedy than the mule itself. You can't help but chuckle, then cough on the dust. Somewhere above you, a hawk circles lazily, its shadow darting over the rocks. You think of bandits again. The mountains are their theater. From up here, a raiding party could appear suddenly, arrows flying before anyone has time to scream. You catch yourself scanning every ridge nervously, even though the leader assures you that this particular pass is safe, for now. Historians still argue whether these warnings were genuine or just calculated drama, designed to remind travelers to stay close and disciplined. Either way, you find yourself inching nearer to the rest of the group. At midday, the caravan halts near a trickle of meltwater sliding down a rock face. The animals rush forward, lips quivering with thirst. You kneel beside them, cupping icy drops into your mouth. The shock of cold is divine, and you laugh at how something so simple could feel like treasure. Someone drops a piece of dried bread into the stream to soften it, an impromptu soup. Another traveler tries the same and loses his bread immediately to the current. He stares at the ripples as if the desert itself has played a cruel joke. As you sit back, you feel the mountain wind on your face, cooler than the furnace of the plain below. For the first time today, you don't resent the choice of route. But when you look down, the desert sprawls endlessly, shimmering like molten gold. A few merchants sigh, muttering that perhaps the flat sands would have been easier after all. You realize the truth of it. No matter which path you take, the Silk Roads make sure you question it. The caravan leader claps his hands, urging everyone up again. Packs are hoisted, ropes retightened, water skins sealed. You fall into line, shoulders aching, but there's no choice but forward. Ahead, the trail zigzags into shadowed crags, where the air hums with the sound of insects you can't see. You steel yourself, joking inwardly that the only thing you're surviving right now is boredom. And yet boredom is a kind of blessing when the alternatives involve dehydration, bandits, or avalanches. You shuffle onward, feeling the slope beneath your feet flatten a little as the path bends out of the mountain shadow. The caravan slows, but this time it's deliberate. A cluster of camels kneel down, their loads groaning, while a pair of horses stamp impatiently. You notice the subtle division of labor. Not every animal is treated the same. The merchants know exactly which beast can survive which stretch. And now you're about to learn the hard truth? Camels rule here, while horses are more like spoiled guests along for the ride. The camels, with their rubbery lips and half-irritated expressions, look built for this misery. Their broad padded feet spread across the sand like nature's snowshoes, where a horse would sink up to its fetlocks. They move with a strange rocking gait, each step like the gentle sway of a boat. And though they look grumpy enough to bite you if you get too close, they are the lifeline of the caravan. Without them, none of this silk, spice, or porcelain would ever reach the next city. Mainstream fact: caravans often relied almost entirely on Bactrian camels, two-humped, shaggy-haired, and capable of carrying up to 400 pounds each. Unlike Arabian camels, they could tolerate the freezing nights as well as the blistering days of Central Asia. Quirky tidbit: some records claim caravans rubbed camel ears with butter to prevent frostbite in the high passes. You glance at the beasts, ears twitching, and wonder if they'd smell like a bakery when the sun hit them. Historians still argue whether such practices were real or simply imaginative exaggerations, but it's a cozy image anyway. The horses, by contrast, are sleek, nervous, and visibly annoyed. They stamp, toss their heads, and require far more water than their desert cousins. But they're fast. Merchants use them for quick trips, scouts ride them ahead to check routes, and wealthy traders cling to them for the image of nobility. You notice one rider in bright silks, clearly more interested in looking impressive than actually hauling goods. His horse gleams, its mane braided with little beads. The camels grunt in what you can only interpret as contempt. As you trudge beside them, you realize the caravan is a walking argument about efficiency versus vanity. Horses are glamorous but needy, while camels are ugly but indispensable. You imagine if the animals could talk, the horses would boast endlessly about speed and style, while the camels would grumble, "Talk to me after you've carried 400 pounds of peppercorns through a sandstorm." The caravan leader strokes the nose of his camel, murmuring to it like an old friend. The bond is obvious. This beast is not just transport, but survival itself. He warns you to stay behind the camel's back legs unless you want to test how far their kicks can launch you. You nod solemnly, then step a little further away than strictly necessary. As the day stretches on, you feel grateful for the camel's pace. Their steady, swaying rhythm lulls you into a half-dreamy state. You catch yourself nodding, only to stumble over a rock and wake with a jolt. A fellow traveler laughs softly, muttering that many merchants claim Camelgate sleepwalking is an actual hazard. People doze while walking, rocking along like the beasts themselves. You're not sure whether he's teasing you or sharing wisdom, but you decide to stay awake just in case. The camels themselves seem unfazed by anything. Dust storms, heat, flies, none of it matters. You watch one casually chew a thorny bush it finds by the path, swallowing it with a smug satisfaction that makes you wince in sympathy. Horses would never. Horses want grain, water, shade. Camels? They'll snack on a cactus just to prove a point. By mid-afternoon, the caravan halts again. The animals are lined up to drink from a narrow trough filled with water carried in barrels from the last well. Horses lower their heads greedily, draining buckets in seconds. Camels sip with a patience that seems almost polite, storing the water away in their bodies like bankers hoarding coin. You hear someone mutter that a well-prepared camel can survive a week without another drink. You take a sip from your own skin and nearly choke on the unfairness of it. Historians still argue whether travelers genuinely trusted horses in desert caravans at all, or if they were mainly prestige accessories for wealthy riders. Looking at the sleek stallion pawing the sand beside you, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. Horses are ornaments in the desert, but ornaments that can gallop fast when raiders appear. You decide it's probably wise to keep at least one horse around, just in case running for your life becomes the plan. As the sun dips lower, you watch the long shadows of camel humps stretch across the sand. They look like little mountains drifting across the desert floor, endlessly patient, endlessly enduring. You tighten your scarf against the chill creeping in and realize that in this world of survival, the camels set the pace. Not you, not the horses, not even the merchants. You're just following the ships of the desert, rocking along to wherever they choose to take you. The caravan groans forward again, each step now measured by thirst. Already, the water you sipped at dawn feels like a faint memory, your tongue drying out as if the desert is quietly drinking from you instead. The leader calls for a pause and orders the water skins inspected. This is not a casual matter. On the Silk Roads, how you ration water often decides who stumbles into the next town and who becomes a cautionary tale whispered at firesides. You watch as a merchant unties a leather water skin, the liquid inside sloshing faintly. It smells faintly of goat hide and dust, but right now it could be ambrosia. Each person tips just enough into their mouth to wet the tongue, then passes it on. There's no greedy gulping, not unless you want to be scolded by half the caravan. You take your turn, tipping only a swallow into your mouth. It seems to vanish instantly, leaving you somehow thirstier, as though water is just a cruel tease. Mainstream fact: desert caravans relied on carefully spaced wells, many of them dug centuries earlier and maintained by local communities or rulers eager to tax passing merchants. Quirky tidbit: some records mention that traders tested wells by lowering small cages with doves inside. If the birds returned alive, the water was safe to drink. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or just colorful exaggeration. You glance at the nearest well in the distance and wonder if the parrot you heard squawking earlier is secretly praying not to be drafted for water testing. When the caravan reaches that well, the animals surge forward, desperate for relief. Camels grunt and kneel, long necks craning down, while horses paw the earth impatiently. The well is little more than a stone ring filled with cool shadows. A bucket creaks down, and when it comes back, the water glimmers like silver coins in the sun. People murmur in relief. You scoop some into your mouth and feel it run down your throat, cold and shocking, as if your body had forgotten what true refreshment felt like. But wells are not always reliable. Sometimes they're dry, sometimes poisoned by salt, sometimes choked with sand. Everyone knows the story of a caravan that arrived at a marked well only to find it barren. You hear one man mutter about his cousin who once had to squeeze water from camel stomachs to survive. You gag at the image and decide you'd rather hallucinate an oasis than drink that concoction. The merchants are meticulous about plugging every skin, sealing them tightly. A drop wasted is a drop mourned. The leader walks along the line, eyeing each skin as though he could calculate exactly how many gulps it should hold. He reminds everyone, drink when ordered, not when you want. You imagine him as a grim bartender with the world's stingiest pours. By late afternoon, the heat returns with vengeance. Your lips crack, your throat scratches, and every thought seems to circle back to water. You think about your kitchen faucet at home, how casually you let it run while brushing your teeth. Out here, such luxury feels obscene. You would give a week's pay for one plastic bottle right now, cool condensation trickling down your hand. To distract yourself, you watch the animals. Camels look smug, as if they invented thirst proofing. They chew cud with maddening calmness while you dream of fountains. Horses, by contrast, look restless, ears flicking, sides heaving. They sweat more, and their riders seem nervous, refilling their buckets at every chance. You suddenly understand why camels are called the ships of the desert. They carry not just weight, but the very possibility of endurance. As dusk creeps in, the caravan halts again near another well, this one surrounded by a few scrubby bushes. Shadows lengthen, and the air finally softens. You kneel by the water and cup your hands, splashing your face. The chill spreads across your skin, a relief so profound it nearly makes you cry. One merchant laughs at your expression and mutters, "First time always feels like rebirth." You nod, too parched to argue. Historians still argue whether every caravan kept strict communal rules about water, or whether wealthier traders secretly hoarded private skins. Looking around, you see both possibilities: shared buckets for the group, but also sly glances as some men tuck skins deep into their packs. Trust is a luxury here, almost as rare as rain. You lie back in the sand as night deepens, staring at the stars. The water you've drunk feels secure in your belly, but you already know the thirst will return tomorrow. On the Silk Roads, survival is measured in mouthfuls, and every swallow of water is both a comfort and a countdown. By dusk, the gate rises out of the plain like a promise kept. Thick walls, a squat tower, and a pointed arch cut with patterns that the sand hasn't managed to smooth away. You shuffle through with the rest of the caravan, legs buzzing with that strange numbness that only a full day of desert can deliver. Inside, the caravanserai opens into a square courtyard, a well in the center flickering with lamplight, stables along the sides, and a raised gallery of little rooms that look exactly like what you need. A door that shuts, a mat to collapse on, and maybe a hook to hang the day's dust. The gatekeeper counts your camels like a miser counts coins, then slams the doors at your back with a thunk that feels like safety. Somewhere above, a guard yawns, leans his spear against the parapet, and promptly dozes off beside a lantern. You decide not to hold this against him. Professional snoring seems to be part of the night shift. You know the routine by now. Lead animals to the stables, loosen the loads, rub the camels' noses, and assure the horses that yes, someone will brush them. Steam rises from sweating backs as stable boys haul buckets from the cistern and hay from a dark, fragrant room. A blacksmith's corner glows. He is already peering at a cracked stirrup, tongs in one hand, a cup of tea in the other. In a far archway, a tiny prayer niche faces its quiet direction, and a few travelers slip off their sandals to kneel, bodies stretching after the day's stiffness. Mainstream fact: along the Seljuk and later Ottoman routes, sultans sponsored networks of hands, caravanserais, roughly a day's march apart, where travelers could find stabling, water, guards, and sometimes even a physician and farrier. Quirky tidbit: some hands kept a communal, lost and found shelf of mismatched sandals. No one wanted to admit they'd left a shoe on the trail, but everyone knew it happened. You eye the shelf, a museum of humble disasters, half tempted to add your least cooperative sandal next to that clay horse you passed earlier. The courtyard comes alive as bundles are stacked under arcades. A money changer unfolds his scales and sets out little weights shaped like ducks and pears. Two scribes spread their reed pens and scrap paper, ready to write letters for travelers who can dictate better than they can hold a brush. A boy wanders with a tray of dates and smashed chickpea patties, chanting the price until someone finally buys 3 just to quiet him. Your stomach offers loud approval. You claim a room, one narrow doorway, a clay niche for a lamp, a mat that has seen nations come and go. There's a lattice window overlooking the well where the rope squeaks in a rhythm you could fall asleep to. You set down your pack and watch dust settle in the lamplight like gold leaf. A lizard investigates your boot. nods as if satisfied with your life choices, and vanishes into a crack. House inspection complete. Down in the stable, your camel turns its head and gives you the look, equal parts reproach and expectation. You scratch its neck, then remember the rumor about buttered ears against frostbite back in the passes and whisper, "Not tonight, bakery boy." The horse in the next stall snorts, as if offended by your casual intimacy with the staff. The parrot's crate is wedged high on a bale of wool. It mutters something that sounds suspiciously like an insult in 3 languages. You realize the bird is learning faster than you are. The cookhouse is a smoky heaven. Steam curls from a cauldron where onion, lentils, and a bony goat conspire to become soup. Flatbread slaps the side of a clay tandoor, puffing like little moons. You cradle a bowl in your hands and burn your tongue in the best way possible. Someone passes pickled turnips, someone else offers a pinch of salt like treasure. Your jokes count rises. First, you congratulate the cook on recreating ocean flavor using only dust and memory. Second, you swear the goat winked before surrendering to the pot. Third, you propose a 5-humped rating system for meals, and the table agrees that tonight is a solid 3 humps and a friendly snore. Sorry now, or around you, gossip drifts like incense. A trader from Kashgar swears a rival dyed his bolts of silk with crushed beetles for a deeper red. A monk argues that color is virtue neutral, which is the long way of saying nice hue. A courier boasts that the next pass is clear of bandits because a local governor sent patrols. Historians still argue whether these inns doubled as state-run intelligence posts, nodes where governors collected news from every mouth, or whether they were mostly private foundations kept alive by charitable endowments. Either way, the caravanserai hums like a switchboard. Rumors plug in, stories light up, and you know more about the road ahead now than you did at the gate. You wander the gallery. In one room, a healer lines up jars. Mint, asafoetida, frankincense, dried rhubarb root, the very cargo you watched being packed. He examines a blister on your heel, nods gravely, and tapes it with linen. He also tries to sell you a tiny jar labeled Sunward Charm. You ask if that's crocodile dung sunscreen by a more poetic name. He coughs delicately and says the formula is proprietary and fragrant. You take a polite step back. In a quiet corner, an old woman threads blue glass beads onto camel halters, protection against the evil eye, she says, and also a handy way to tell whose beast is whose when every animal is the same shade of dust. You buy one, partly for luck, partly for fashion. The camel will judge you, but secretly it will be pleased. A musician tunes a 2-string spike fiddle and coaxes a thin, sweet river of sound from it. The notes drift through the arches, cooling minds faster than any breeze. A drum joins in, soft as footsteps on woven mats. You lean against a pillar, bowl empty, heart full, and let the melody carry you nowhere in particular. For a moment, the day's grit sifts out of your thoughts, and you can almost nap upright like a respectable camel. Fees are settled with the keeper. Some coins here, a tally mark there. Historians still argue whether lodging was always free for the first 3 nights under certain sultans, or whether that generosity depended entirely on the richness of the local endowment. Tonight, it seems half subsidized. Your stabling is covered, your soup is not, and the bathhouse, yes, there's a bathhouse, is a modest fee that you pay without blinking. Warm water sluices over your shoulders, steam fogs your scarf, and you emerge lighter by a pound of dust and one stubborn opinion about horses. Back in your room, you lay your head on a saddlebag. The walls hold the day's heat like a memory. Outside, the Wells rope squeaks, and a guard spear rings gently against stone as he shifts. Someone laughs in the corridor, someone snores, someone whispers a prayer. You think about the maps and rumors ahead, the wells you must find, the tolls you must pay, the beetles that will insist on crawling into shoes no matter how many times you flip them. You make a note to shake your boots in the morning, twice, for luck and for beetles. Before you blow out the lamp, you check the knot on your purse, then tuck it under your mat. It's not paranoia. It's the first rule of travel. Trust everyone and everything, but also tie better knots. You whisper goodnight to the camel, to the parrot clerk, to the lizard landlord, and to the grumpy guard whose snore has settled into a strangely comforting bass line. The caravanserai breathes with you, stone, wood, rope, water, holding your small life for a single night, then handing it back at dawn with a creak of hinges and a shove toward the road. Remember the buttered ears and the crocodile charm? You smile in the dark. Tomorrow you'll need neither, only steady feet, a careful sip, and the stubborn optimism to believe the next gate is waiting for you somewhere ahead. The next morning, you wake to a sky the color of polished copper. The air is already restless, a faint hiss running over the dunes as if the desert is clearing its throat before shouting. The leader frowns, squints into the horizon, and mutters one word that makes everyone tighten their scarves: sandstorm. You thought you understood wind. At home, it rattles windows, bends trees, and maybe steals your hat if you're unlucky. Out here, it is a different creature altogether. The desert wind doesn't just blow, it pelts, stings, and scours. It hurls a billion tiny knives across your skin and eyes, a punishment disguised as weather. You tug your cloth tighter around your mouth and shuffle forward as the first gusts rise. The animals know before you do. Camels groan, kneel instinctively, and press their noses to the sand. Horses rear, their eyes wide, hooves pounding as if they could outrun the sky itself. Merchants scramble to grab ropes, tightening loads before the storm strips them loose. A cage rattles violently. The parrot shrieks in a voice that sounds disturbingly like, "Turn back." Mainstream fact: sandstorms were a notorious hazard along the Silk Roads, particularly in the Taklamakan and Gobi deserts, where shifting dunes could erase entire paths overnight. Quirky tidbit: some travelers swore by carrying onion juice to smear under their eyes, believing the sting prevented sand from sticking. Historians still argue whether this remedy was superstition or a desperate experiment, but as you rub grit from your lashes, you can't help wishing for a pocket onion of your own. The world blurs quickly. A wall of dust rises on the horizon, dark as storm clouds, but somehow more menacing because it's made of the very ground beneath you. The wind slams into the caravan, and suddenly you're in it. Sand in your ears, sand in your teeth, sand between your thoughts. You drop to your knees, copying the veterans, and throw your cloak over your head. The air roars, louder than drums, louder than oceans. You realize you could scream right now, and no one would hear a thing. Minutes crawl like hours. Beneath your cloak, you breathe through the fabric, every inhale hot and dusty. You feel the sand piling around your legs, half burying you in moments. Your heart pounds, not just from fear, but from the eerie thought that the desert doesn't even notice you're here. You're a pebble tossed in its endless tide. Someone bumps against you, muttering a prayer. You nod, though they can't see it. A hand grabs your shoulder. One of the guides, shouting instructions you can't hear. He gestures, "Stay low, don't move, wait it out." You clutch your pack tighter, as if silk bolts and apricot pits will anchor you to the earth. When the storm finally weakens, it does so grudgingly. The roar drops to a whistle, the air thins, and the dunes stop shifting like waves. You peel back your cloak, blinking through eyes rimmed with grit. The caravan reemerges from the dust like ghosts, faces wrapped, eyes red, animals coated in a fine crust of sand that makes them look sculpted. You stand shakily, brushing yourself off. But the desert has left its autograph everywhere. Grit crunches in your teeth, scratches your throat, stings your skin. The parrot coughs, then mutters something remarkably rude in the voice of its owner. You laugh hoarsely, grateful for a humor in the storm's wake. The leader checks the line. Everyone is accounted for. A miracle, considering that whole caravans have vanished in storms like these. You've heard stories of groups swallowed entirely, paths erased, bodies never found. Historians still argue whether these tales were true or cautionary exaggerations. But looking around at the new, unrecognizable dunes, you believe every word. The caravan moves again, slower, shaken. The path is gone, covered in drifts, but the guides step forward with calm certainty, scanning the sun, the stars, the faint slope of land. They walk as if memory itself is their compass. You follow, humbled, every step crunching in the sand that nearly buried you. As evening falls, the air clears. The sky reveals itself in colors so sharp they hurt your eyes. Violet, orange, and a sudden explosion of stars. You collapse by the fire, too tired to eat more than a mouthful of dates. The sandstorm has taken your strength, your comfort, and your illusions. But oddly enough, it has left you with something too: respect. The desert doesn't care if you survive. It just is. And somehow, surviving even one of its tantrums feels like a small victory. Night folds over the dunes like a cool blanket, and after the storm's tantrum, the sky feels almost apologetic, polished, crystalline, generous with stars. The guides wait for this moment the way bakers wait for the first rise of dough. You watch the leader step into the courtyard shadow, tilt his chin, and begin reading the heavens as if they're a familiar page torn from a favorite book. The parrot, mercifully quiet at last, tucks its head beneath a wing. You pull your scarf loose and breathe, tasting ash from the cook fire and a thread of mint from someone's tea. He points, not with drama, but with the certainty of habit. There is the ladle you call the Big Dipper. He calls it a cart, then a plow. Then, depending on the language drifting through the caravan tonight, a scoop for pouring time. Trace the far edge and it leads you straight to a steadfast pin. Polaris, the North Star, patient as an innkeeper who never turns out the lamp. Mainstream fact. For centuries, travelers have used Polaris to find north because it barely wanders from its place near the celestial pole. The leader checks its height with a practiced squint and a thumb's width held at arm's length, then nods like a man who's just confirmed the door is locked. Around you, the younger guides murmur a counting rhyme. It sounds like a lullaby, and in a way it is. Names of stars stitched to distances between wells, a memory palace hung on the sky. Quirky tidbit, some caravans train their apprentices with sing-song star maps, pairing constellations with landmarks. When the Pleiades tilt like spilled grain, the tamarisk grove is 3 hours farther. When the scorpion's tail rises, the Yardang Ridge hides a cistern. Chua, you hum along, grateful that even the cosmos has mnemonics. Your brain, still full of sand, clings to the melody like a towel to a clothesline. The leader's hand glides to Cassiopeia, the crooked W, then down to a faint smudge, your first clear glimpse of the Milky Way after the storm. He calls it the Straw Road, another man calls it the Bird Path, and someone from farther east whispers River of Heaven. You privately decide it looks like a trail of flour across a black countertop and immediately get hungry again. First joke. You ask if the Big Dipper is legally required to ladle soup in this kitchen of stars. The nearest mule snorts. You take that as a yes. The guides don't rely on stars alone. They listen to the wind through thorn bushes, watch how sand scallops on the lee side of dunes, and feel the land slope beneath their feet even in the dark. By lamplight, one unrolls a grubby strip of parchment, half map, half rumor, inked with little towers and dots where wells are meant to be. He traces the line from tonight's caravanserai toward a ridge of wind-carved pillars. We'll walk at second moonrise, he says softly, meaning the time when the moon clears a nearby hill. Dawn would be too late for the cool air they want. You ask about compasses, because in your modern mind, a needle in a box solves everything. He smiles. A needle is a guest, he says, but stars are the hosts. Historians still argue whether overland caravans on these routes adopted magnetic compasses widely before sailors did, or whether guides trusted sky, slope, and memory far more than any jittery needle. To prove he's no technophobe, the leader produces a battered astrolabe, more showpiece than workhorse here, and uses it to measure Polaris's altitude with theatrical solemnity. Second joke, you whisper to your camel that the instrument also measures how close you are to an actual nap. The camel yawns as if confirming your data. When the gate creaks open, you slip into the night. The caravan moves like a slow, thoughtful river. Bells on the lead camel give a small, regular clink, insurance against losing the line if ground haze or rogue dust rises again. Your feet find the rhythm, and soon the desert's hush folds around you, broken only by the rustle of robes and the soft thump of pads on sand. The air is a balm after the day, cool, dry, edged with a faint sweetness of tamarisk. Somewhere behind you, a pot lid knocks gently against a saddle. It becomes a metronome for endurance. The leader's staff points ahead to a low black serration. yardangs, those wind-sculpted ridges that look like the ribs of sleeping stone mammals. He threads you between them where the footing is firmest, a lane of hard-packed grit that spares your ankles. He has walked this corridor enough times to know which shadows hide sudden dips and which are only drama. At a cairn of stacked stones, crowned with a bleached goat skull, he pauses and sets a fresh pebble on top. Memory makes its own mileposts. You try a trick he mentioned. Stop, close your eyes, and feel the faint pitch of the land. Even blind, your body senses a long, patient downward tilt. That means a wadi lies ahead, and wadis mean scrub, and scrub means a chance at dew. Mainstream fact: along certain Silk Road segments, ancient beacon towers and ridgeline ruins helped orient caravans. Wells and cisterns were placed where seasonal water once ran, not where whim suggested. The leader gestures toward a silhouette that resolves into the stump of such a tower. You raise a hand in thanks to those long-gone engineers and move on. At rest stops, the guides compare notes like chess players. How long since the last hoof print? Which dune crests look freshly combed by the wind? Can you smell the faint tar of camel packs from a caravan ahead? One veteran pinches sand and lets it stream from his fingers. He judges grain size with a frown. The storm has shifted things. The fine stuff drifted east. You pretend you can tell and nod wisely. Third joke. You ask if he can also tell whether there's a tea house in the next valley. He replies without missing a beat. Yes, if you carry the tea. Someone produces a length of cord knotted at intervals. Paces marked not for distance alone, but for timing. 2 knots between the ladle's lip and the horizon, he says, and we should smell smoke. You want that to be literally true. Smoke from a shepherd's fire, perhaps, but even if it isn't, the ritual calms you. The leader's confidence is the real compass. You find yourself borrowing it like a cloak. A young guide stumbles on a half-buried post. He kneels, scrapes sand away, and reveals the base of an old sign whose painted letters the desert has slowly eaten. The elders exchange a glance. They remember when this post stood taller, when the well it marked was reliable. Historians still argue whether the state maintained such markers diligently or left them to the mercy of wind and local charity. You trace the ghost of a character with a fingertip. Grit whispers back, not unkindly, "Keep moving." Far ahead, the sky pales at its belly. The leader lifts his staff, the bell hushes, the caravan slows. He points again to Polaris, now riding a touch lower, and sketches a line between it and the faint smudge of dawn, east, and the day you did not expect to reach so cleanly after yesterday's fury. You taste the onion-sting memory from the storm and pat your pocket as if an imaginary bulb lives there now, your private talisman against flying grit and worse advice. When the caravan halts, it's at a shallow depression ringed with scrub. Dew has beaded on thorn and grass. The camels nose the damp with dignified interest. Water skins are checked without hurry. The guides settle on their heels, unwrap a shared map, and pinch crumbs of bread over it, announcing tomorrow's bearings as if seasoning a recipe. You lean back on your pack, the stars dimming above you, and realize how much of survival here is borrowed calm. Their poise, their poems, their knack for turning sky into a road. You close your gritty eyes. The lullaby returns. Pleiades, North Star, Cassiopeia, names you didn't need yesterday and will not forget tomorrow. Somewhere a beetle bumbles heroically into someone's shoe, fulfilling its small comedic destiny. You smile in the dark. If the desert is a test, the answer key is older than empires and written in cold fire. You don't have to own it, you only have to listen. The morning begins too quiet, and that's how you know something is wrong. The desert usually coughs up at least one clue. Wind humming over the dunes, a camel groaning, a parrot swearing in 3 languages. But today, it's the stillness that raises every hair on your neck. You glance toward the horizon. There, a faint smear of dust coils upward, not wide enough to be a storm. The leader stiffens, his eyes narrowing. A whisper travels down the line. Riders. Bandits are the nightmare you joke about until the day the punchline arrives. Along the silk roads, the well-strapped to camels, silks, spices, silver, porcelain, wasn't just tempting, it was irresistible. Mainstream fact. Rulers often stationed garrisons at caravanserais or fortified towns to discourage raids, but out in the empty miles between, You were your own guard. Quirky tidbit. Some caravans hired storytellers to spin loud tales at night, not for entertainment, but to convince lurking raiders that the group was larger and wealthier than it truly was. Historians still argue whether those tales actually fooled anyone, or if the raiders just enjoyed the free theater before attacking anyway. Now, watching the dust rise, you realize there's nothing theatrical about the tension in the air. The leader raises his staff. Immediately, the caravan bunches tighter, camels herded into a mass, valuables shifted inward. Guards. Yes, you discover with relief there are a few actual guards, unsling bows and spears. Their faces remain calm, but their eyes dart. Horses, restless as ever, are pulled forward, riders mounting quickly in case speed is needed. You find yourself in the center of the knot, pressed between a bale of wool and the crate that houses the world's angriest parrot. If anyone is surviving this, you're betting on the bird. The dust cloud thickens. Out of it, shapes emerge. Riders on lean horses, scarves whipping, weapons glinting. They halt at a distance first, silhouettes against the glare, a silent intimidation. The desert seems to hold its breath. One of your guards lifts his bow a fraction. Your mouth goes dry, but that might just be the desert being rude again. Then comes the approach. Not a charge, not yet. Just a slow trot that brings them closer. Enough for you to see their faces. Tan, lean, eyes sharp with calculation. They're sizing you up the way a hawk sizes up a rabbit. You know that look, even across centuries. Is it worth the effort? The leader steps forward. No panic, no bow raised. He lifts his arms in a gesture that could mean peace, or at least conversation. Words are exchanged in a tongue you half recognize, half guess at. You catch phrases, tribute, safe passage, tax. The same words, it seems, whether spoken by a king in a palace or a raider in the sand. You wait, hard hammering, while the bargaining unfolds. A pouch of coins changes hands, a bundle of peppercorns offered like a diplomatic gift. The riders laugh, slap their thighs, mutter to one another. For a terrifying moment, you think they'll decide it isn't enough. You imagine the chaos, screaming animals, arrows in the air, silk bales slashed open. Your fingers tighten on your pack, as if your spare sandals and apricots matter more than the porcelain rattling nearby. But then, mercifully, the mood shifts. One of the riders snatches the parrot's cage, peers inside, and the bird greets him with a perfectly timed insult it learned 2 nights ago. The bandits roar with laughter, nearly falling from their saddles. Third joke of the section. You lean to the merchant beside you and whisper, "Well, at least we know comedy is the true currency." He doesn't laugh, but the timing is flawless. After a long pause, the riders wheel their horses, coins jingling, spices pocketed. They vanish into the horizon as quickly as they came, leaving behind a hush broken only by the relieved sigh of an entire caravan. You breathe again, shoulders sagging, realizing just how tightly you'd been holding yourself. The leader mutters, "Cheaper than arrows," and signals the caravan forward. Historians still argue whether bandits along the Silk Roads operated as independent raiders or as semi-official toll collectors tolerated by local rulers. Watching the ease with which tribute settled the encounter, you suspect the truth is blurred, as survival often is. Tonight the bandits leave you alive, and in this landscape, that's the only definition of victory that matters. You trudge forward again, sand crunching underfoot, animals groaning, tension leaking slowly from the group. The parrot mutters triumphantly, clearly proud of its role as unintentional diplomat. You pat the crate gratefully and whisper that you owe it a handful of sunflower seeds if you ever reach Samarkand. The desert returns to its regular indifference, the horizon widening once more. But in your chest, a new awareness lingers. The Silk Roads are not just sand and stars. They are people, some walking beside you, some watching from ridges, some deciding in an instant whether you survive. The road stretches again, quieter now that the bandits have disappeared, and you realize how absurdly varied the caravan's cargo actually is. To your left, a mule plods along with a crate of porcelain jars, cushioned in straws, each one clinking like teeth. To your right, a camel carries bundles of cinnamon sticks, the air around it spiced like a bakery. Somewhere behind you, the unmistakable smell of raw wool drifts forward in waves, battling with the sharper bite of dried fish. It's a rolling contradiction, part treasure chest, part flea market, part traveling zoo. You glance back at the birdcage. The parrot, still smug from saving everyone with its accidental diplomacy, cocks its head and whistles. Its feathers flash green against the dust, a splash of color that feels like an insult to the monochrome desert. You can't help but laugh. Mainstream fact. Written accounts of caravans really do describe live animals being transported. Not only parrots, but peacocks, falcons, and even exotic cats meant as gifts for rulers. Quirky tidbit. A Tang Dynasty inventory once listed singing crickets as part of a shipment because apparently someone thought nothing soothed insomnia like an insect chorus. Historians still argue whether caravans carried so many living creatures regularly, or whether these mentions were exceptional luxuries recorded precisely because they were unusual. Porcelain, on the other hand, was less unusual. You pass a merchant nervously tapping one of his crates, whispering prayers against bumps. The jars are wrapped in straw, bundled in layers of felt, and lashed tighter than your boots. Still, every rock in the path makes the man wince like he's breaking ribs. He mutters that one crack could undo a year's profit. You pat the side of the crate as you pass, and joke that at least the shards could be resold as modern art. He doesn't laugh, but the parrot squawks in apparent approval. The spices are easier to love. Cinnamon, cloves, pepper, ginger. Every time the wind shifts, the caravan smells like a medieval kitchen about to invent dessert. You breathe deep, grateful for the distraction. The man leading that camel brags that pepper is worth its weight in silver in some markets. He tells you that some buyers keep pepper locked in little coffers, like jewelry. You imagine a nobleman in Europe opening his treasure chest and pulling out, not gold, but a pouch of sneeze powder. History is weird. Silk bales ride quietly, too valuable to show off. The wrappings are plain, dull cloth, disguising the shimmer beneath. But you know what's inside. Bolts of fabric smoother than water, dyed with shades that seem stolen from sunrise. A whisper drifts through the group about smuggling. Merchants hiding silk thread inside hollowed-out bamboo poles, or even stuffing cocoons into walking sticks to sneak trade secrets. Historians still argue how strictly China enforced its monopoly, but the smugglers' stories feel too clever not to be true. Then there are the medicinal oddities. Rhubarb roots, dried ginseng, sacks of frankincense resin. One merchant insists loudly that rhubarb purges the system, which you decide is the 8th century way of saying, don't stray too far from the bushes. You consider telling him that modern medicine mostly agrees it's just a laxative, but you let him keep his mystique. Third joke. You mutter to yourself that the true secret of surviving the Silk Roads is simply never trusting a man who sells both rhubarb and parrots. The farther you walk, the more bizarre the cargo becomes. A crate opens briefly to reveal rolled paintings on silk, bound tight and painted with serene Buddhas. Another mule hauls wooden boxes marked with delicate ink, paper, thin as a whisper, stacked in reams. Someone insists that these pages will change the world, that words can be multiplied endlessly now. You nod, not knowing that the technology of papermaking really is about to ripple outward, carrying poetry, scripture, and tax forms farther than silk ever could. At one rest stop, the merchants gather and compare curiosities. A man from India proudly displays a sack of sugar crystals, explaining how cane is boiled into syrup and dried into glittering lumps. The Chinese traders exchange skeptical looks. They have honey, thank you very much. Another merchant unwraps lacquered boxes that gleam even in the dim light. Surfaces so glossy, you can see your sand-caked face reflected in them. You pull a third joke of the hour, whispering that it's the only mirror in the desert, shiny enough to make even a camel look smug. Historians still argue how much of this cargo traveled in one go, whether caravans were such eclectic bazaars, or if records exaggerate by lumping years of trade into one imaginary parade. Looking around, you can't imagine how anyone could invent this combination. The desert is ridiculous enough without help. As the day winds down, the air fills with the smells of all these things mingling, pepper fighting with fish, silk dust mixing with cinnamon, resin smoke drifting into wool. It's confusing, intoxicating, and oddly comforting. You realize that what you're hauling is more than cargo. It's the proof that cultures crave what others have, whether it's a bolt of silk, a jar of porcelain, or a squawking parrot with bad manners. You adjust your pack, sneeze at a cloud of spice dust, and follow the line onward. The caravan is noisy, awkward, and overburdened, yet somehow it works. Survival here isn't just about water and wells, it's about hauling enough oddities to make the desert's misery worthwhile. Your stomach finally voices its complaint loudly. The caravan has marched for hours, and while the smell of cinnamon and pepper drifting from the loads might be tantalizing, you know you won't be feasting on luxury tonight. Meals on the Silk Roads are more about endurance than indulgence. You lower yourself to the sand, and soon the familiar ritual begins. Food is unwrapped, divided, and gnawed with the quiet determination of people who know tomorrow will demand the same. Mainstream fact: travelers on these routes often lived on simple rations, flatbread baked quickly on heated stones, dried fruits like dates and apricots, hard cheese, and salted or dried meats. The meals had to survive weeks in heat and dust, so taste was an afterthought. Quirky tidbit: there are accounts of dried camel meat being softened in water, but some say it resembled chewing leather even after hours of soaking. You eye the jerky in your hand and silently wonder if historians still argue just how edible it really was, or if they simply stopped trying. Tonight you're handed a chunk of coarse bread. It's stale enough to double as a building material. You crack it open and dip it into a communal bowl of lentil stew, thickened more with sand than spices. The lentils taste earthy, filling, and faintly metallic, like they've borrowed character from the cooking pot. You chew, swallow, and decide it could be worse. A fellow traveler pulls out a pouch of dried apricots, sticky and sweet, and hands you one. For a few blissful bites, the desert feels like a fruit market instead of a furnace. Meat is rarer, and when it appears, it's usually stringy. Tonight, a merchant proudly produces strips of mutton jerky, waving them like prized ribbons. You take one and gnaw. It resists your teeth like an old sandal. You joke, if I can't bite through this, maybe the bandits can't either. A few chuckles ripple around the fire. At least humor doesn't need seasoning. Other flavors creep in. Someone sprinkles cumin over the stew. Someone else passes around pickled vegetables carried in clay jars, their brine sharp enough to make your eyes water. The parrot yells too sour at exactly the wrong moment, and the entire circle erupts in laughter. You're fairly certain the bird is becoming the caravan's unofficial food critic. The reality of eating here is monotony. Day after day, the same cycle. Bread, dried fruit, nuts, and if you're lucky, soup made from lentils or beans. Sometimes rice appears, sticky and clumped, a miracle when water is plentiful. Other times, the cook experiments with what's available. One evening, you're given something chewy and smoky. You ask what it is. The cook just grins and says, "Don't ask." You decide ignorance is a delicacy in its own right. Historians still argue whether travelers spiced their food heavily to cover staleness, or if spices were too precious to waste on daily meals. Judging by the pinch of cumin tonight, the answer seems to be a little of both. The wealthier merchants may hoard saffron and pepper for trade, but a pinch sneaks into the pot when no one is looking. Survival is important, but morale matters too. You watch as a boy shapes dough into flat discs and slaps them against the side of a clay oven, flames licking inside. The bread puffs, blackens in patches, and smells heavenly. When he pulls it free, steam curls upward, soft enough to tear with your fingers. You burn your tongue immediately but smile anyway. After a day of sand, sweat, and fear, fresh bread feels like a reward. Third joke of the section. As you nibble, you tell your neighbor that if you ever write a cookbook about this journey, you'll call it 50 Shades of Beige, a culinary tour of the Silk Roads. He groans, but not before choking on his lentils from laughing too hard. The meal winds down slowly. Some sip tea brewed from brick-like lumps of compressed leaves, bitter enough to wake the dead. Others gnaw on nuts, walnuts mostly, cracking shells with stones. A merchant boasts about almond orchards back home and insists these nuts taste inferior. You nod politely, chewing anyway, 'cause out here, even inferior almonds are small treasures. As the fire dies, the group grows quiet. Bowls are rinsed with a splash of precious water, hands wiped on cloths that are already half sand. The smell of cumin, smoke, and sour pickles lingers in the air, mingling with the sweat of animals and the dust of the road. Your stomach is not exactly full, but it's content, and that's enough. Lying back, you realize survival on the Silk Roads isn't just about finding water or shelter. It's about enduring the monotony of meals, finding joy in a dried apricot, laughing when a parrot heckles the cook, and keeping your body moving even when the bread is harder than stone. Tomorrow the same rations will appear, but tonight they taste almost like comfort. Morning aches arrive before the sun does. Your feet throb, your back stiffens, and your throat already feels as though you've swallowed a fistful of sandpaper. This, you realize, is not just a test of endurance, but of maintenance. The desert punishes small mistakes. Ignore a blister, and infection follows. Miss a sip, and dehydration creeps in. Tonight's treasure isn't silk or porcelain. It's a tiny pouch of herbs and a man who claims he knows what to do with them. You limp toward the healer, whose mat is spread with jars, bundles, and powders that look suspiciously like whatever could be swept off a spice merchant's floor. Still, everyone treats him with respect. Mainstream fact: caravans often carried physicians, or at least men trained in Greco-Arabic, Persian, or Chinese medical traditions. They were part doctor, part apothecary, part therapist, prescribing remedies that range from herbal teas to bloodletting. Quirky tidbit: one account even mentions camel dung mixed with vinegar as a treatment for wounds. Historians still argue whether this was truly applied in practice or simply copied from earlier medical texts with a straight face. You sit as he inspects your blistered heel. He mutters about the dangers of sand grinding into raw skin, then powders it with ground myrrh, binding it with linen. You thank him, though your faith in myrrh's antiseptic properties is more hope than knowledge. He also prescribes a tea made from dried rhubarb root. You remember the merchant bragging about its purging power, and wonder if the healer has been bribed by the rhubarb lobby. Nearby, another traveler complains of heat stroke, red-faced, eyes glassy. The healer fans him, dribbles water on his lips, then presses a packet of mint leaves to his forehead. A small crowd gathers, whispering that mint cools the blood. You're not convinced, but you nod in solidarity. The man stirs after a while, groaning but alive, and the healer receives nods of approval as though he's conjured rain. Your curiosity gets the better of you, and you peek into the healer's jars. Dried figs, fennel seeds, little lumps of resin, and powders in shades of red, green, and chalky white. Some are labeled carefully, others just glow with the mystery of try at your own risk. He insists he can treat scorpion stings with a poultice of garlic and salt. He also swears onion skins soaked in vinegar will ward off fever. You begin to suspect the entire caravan doubles as a wandering salad. Third joke of the section. You mutter that if you keel over, please don't let them revive you with camel dung tea. You'd rather haunt the desert with style. The parrot naturally squawks, "Dung tea," at full volume, sealing your fate as the caravan's new punchline. Not every remedy comes from jars. A few merchants share folk cures passed down generations. One insists you must sleep with a smooth stone under your tongue to prevent cracked lips. Another claims tying a blue thread to your wrist wards off stomach cramps. Historians still argue whether these practices were genuine healthcare or symbolic comforts, but in the desert, you don't really separate the two. Comfort is medicine. You learn the art of pacing too. Veterans advise walking heel to toe, steady and slow, rather than rushing. They tell you that most deaths on the road come not from bandits or storms, but from exhaustion. Feet splitting, muscles tearing, thirst overwhelming the body before the mind accepts it. You test their method, and sure enough, your stride feels easier, as though the desert itself has loosened its grip. By evening, you're weary but steadier. The caravan rests in a shallow wadi, and the healer makes his rounds, checking animals as well. He rubs oil into a camel's cracked lips, sprinkles powdered sulfur on a mule's sore hoof, and mutters a prayer over the parrot just for good measure. The bird sneezes dramatically, then declares, "Too sour," once more, sending everyone into tired laughter. As you settle down, you realize that health on the Silk Roads is not about avoiding sickness, but about constant negotiation with it. Every blister, every cough, every bout of dizziness is addressed quickly, patched with herbs, oils, or superstition. It's a fragile balance. One wrong turn, one untreated wound, and the desert collects another toll. You sip the rhubarb tea reluctantly, grimacing at its bitter tang, and remind yourself, survival doesn't always taste good. By the time the caravan crests the next ridge, the sight ahead nearly steals your breath. After days of sand, rock, and dust, you see towers, domes, and a haze of smoke rising from chimneys. A city sprawls along the horizon, its walls sun-baked and glowing like bronze, its gates painted with geometric patterns. The animals perk up as if they recognize the smell of fodder and refuse. You perk up because the air carries something you haven't inhaled in days. Spice smoke, fresh bread, maybe even roasting meat. Civilization, wrapped in the noise of a bazaar, beckons. You shuffle through the gates with the others, joining the stream of merchants, farmers, pilgrims, and wide-eyed children tugging at their parents' sleeves. The contrast is dizzying. One minute you're wrapped in silence and wind, the next you're drowned in voices. Languages tumble into one another: Persian, Turkic, Chinese, Arabic, and tongues you can't name. Mainstream fact: cities like Samarkand, Kashgar, and Bukhara became legendary crossroads where dozens of cultures collided daily. Quirky tidbit: travelers reported that markets sometimes sold singing slaves trained only to recite poetry for entertainment. Historians still argue whether such reports are literal truth or exotic exaggeration to impress readers back home. The bazaar's lanes twist like veins. You pass stalls hung with silk that shimmer in the sun: scarlet, azure, gold. Merchants shout prices, pulling cloth across their arms with theatrical flair. Next comes the smell of dried fish, sharp enough to make you gag, competing with the honeyed sweetness of pastries dripping with syrup. You swear your stomach tries to walk ahead of you. Everywhere is barter and noise. A man sells knives, each blade catching the light like liquid. Another shouts about carpets woven with patterns so dense you could lose a decade tracing them. A boy tugs your sleeve, offering pomegranates split open, seeds glistening like rubies. You bite into one, juice running down your chin, and it's so bright and sweet that you nearly forgive the desert for everything. Animals press in too. Donkeys bray, oxen lumber under loads of grain, camels sigh dramatically as if they've been cast in an opera. The parrot screeches insults at them from its crate, and passers-by laugh. One child points and demands her father buy the bird. You silently pray he doesn't. You pause at a stall where ink and paper are displayed, thin sheets stacked in neat piles. The scribe behind the counter boasts that with paper, ideas travel faster than caravans. You nod, though you're mostly distracted by the way his fingers are already stained black. A scholar nearby purchases a handful of sheets, declaring he will copy Buddhist sutras tonight. Another, more sly, mentions he'll use his for tax records. You chuckle, realizing paperwork will outlive poetry every time. Historians still argue whether the true wealth of the Silk Roads was silk and spices, or whether the real treasure was exactly this: ideas passing hand to hand, from scripture to science to bureaucracy. You're inclined to agree as you watch a merchant demonstrate Hindu numerals to a customer, drawing quick sums in the dust with his toe. The sensory assault doesn't stop. You brush against jars of indigo, the powder staining your sleeve blue. You nearly trip over a tray of glass beads sparkling like captured water drops. You duck past a man roasting skewers of lamb fat, the smoke clinging to your hair. Someone shoves a cup of fermented mare's milk into your hand. You sip. It's sour, fizzy, and tastes like a prank. Third joke of the section, you declare, This is proof the desert gods are comedians, and a bystander nods solemnly as if you've spoken a profound truth. At the center of the market rises a mosque, its dome tiled with turquoise, minaret pointing at the sky. Bells from a Buddhist monastery clang faintly farther down the street. Crosses hang discreetly in a side alley where Nestorian Christians gather. The city hums with contradictions, faiths jostling elbow to elbow, their prayers carried upward like competing songs. You slip into the stream of it all, amazed that one road can carry so many worlds. By dusk, your pack is heavier with small purchases: a pouch of almonds, a length of dyed thread, and a tiny brass charm in the shape of a camel. You chew bread hot from a tandoor, sipping sweet tea laced with cardamom. After days of lentils and jerky, the flavors feel like a festival. The streets glow with lanterns, laughter spilling into alleys, drums thumping somewhere behind the walls. When you finally retreat to the caravanserai within the city, the quiet courtyard feels like a balm. Your head spins from the noise, but your heart is light. The desert outside demanded silence and obedience, but here the bazaar overwhelms you with voices, colors, and scents. Survival, you realize, isn't only about crossing empty sands. It's also about not losing yourself in the storm of a city when it finally embraces you. The city's glow fades behind you as the caravan files back onto the road. The memory of markets, bright silks, pomegranate juice, and the parrot's near sale lingers in your mind, but now you're back where survival is quieter, in the art of bargaining. You've learned quickly that it doesn't end at the bazaar gates. Every checkpoint, toll post, and roadside market demands the same skill: convincing someone that your coins are lighter than they look and your cargo less valuable than it smells. The caravan halts at an open square just outside the city, where scales are set up under a striped awning. Merchants crowd forward, goods laid out, silver clinking, voices raised in overlapping arguments. A buyer lifts a bale of silk, letting the light show its weave, and immediately declares it inferior. The seller sputters, swears by his ancestors, and insists the weave was blessed by monks. Back and forth they go, the truth somewhere between, the price rising and falling like the dunes themselves. Mainstream fact: silver coins, dirhams, drachmas, dinars, move back and forth along the silk roads, often clipped, shaved, or weighed carefully to make sure they were not counterfeit. Quirky tidbit: some merchants carried their own sets of tiny bronze weights shaped like animals or fruit, ducks, lions, pears, so they could test scales before trading. You spot one trader tonight plunking down a bronze duck on the pan, and you wonder if it's also a good luck charm. Historians still argue how widespread fraud was at these posts. Some say honesty was enforced by reputation. Others claim everyone shaved a coin or two when no one was watching. Nearby, an argument erupts over spices. A buyer insists the peppercorns are mixed with pebbles. The seller snaps back that the desert itself added grit, not him. You lean closer, sniffing, and can't quite decide. Third joke of the section. You whisper to your neighbor, "At least if you eat pebbles, they don't go stale." And he nearly spits his tea laughing. Your turn comes. You present a bundle of wool, the merchant opposite weighing it in his hand like a melon at market. He offers 3 coins, too low. You counter with 6. He scowls, waves dramatically, and declares your wool fit only for stuffing pillows. You shrug, begin to walk away. The trick works. He calls you back, grudgingly offering 4. You shake hands, satisfied enough. The ritual is exhausting, but necessary. Out here, survival depends as much on haggling as it does on finding wells. Not all negotiations are about goods. At the toll gate, guards lean on their spears, bored eyes flicking over your group. They demand payment, coin, spices, or cloth. The leader sighs and pulls a pouch from his robe. The guards count lazily, one coin slipping suspiciously into a pocket. Historians still argue whether these tolls were official state taxes or thinly disguised bribes. Watching the casual way the guard yawns and pockets silver, You suspect the answer is both. That night, you sit around the fire as merchants trade stories about the art of bargaining. One swears by silence, never speak first, let the other drown in his own words. Another insists on theatrics, pounding his chest and declaring that he'd rather starve than sell at that price. A younger merchant mutters that he just cries a little until the other side gives in. Everyone laughs, but no one denies it might work. You notice how much of this survival has nothing to do with sandstorms or bandits. It's in words, gestures, and the ability to bluff. You wonder aloud if the desert is easier to face than another afternoon at the scales. Someone grins and says, "At least the sand doesn't argue back." As the fire dies, coins jingle, spices settle back into sacks, and the caravan prepares for another day. You lie awake thinking of the bronze duck weight, the peppercorns mixed with pebbles, the sly hand pocketing silver. In the end, the Silk Roads are a trade of illusions. Persuading others your goods are worth more, your coins are worth less, and your patience will last longer. And somehow, through those illusions, everyone survives. The morning march begins with a strange chorus. The clink of coins still being counted, the creak of bales being retied, and the muttered prayers of travelers who know survival here isn't only about food or water. It's about the culture you carry and the ideas you borrow. You trudge forward, realizing that along the Silk Roads, goods aren't the only things exchanged. Beliefs, languages, and stories travel in the same bundles, and sometimes they weigh more heavily than silk. You overhear two monks near the middle of the line, their robes faded, but their voices steady. They're reciting sutras, soft chants that ride the desert wind. Mainstream fact, Buddhist texts traveled westward along these very routes, carried in scrolls, in memory, and in the quiet persistence of pilgrims. Quirky tidbit. One Chinese monk famously stuffed sacred manuscripts inside hollow bamboo staves, disguising them as walking sticks. Historians still argue whether this was widespread or simply one monk's clever trick. But as you glance at the staff beside you, you can't help wondering if it conceals more than wood. Not far away, a Muslim merchant traces Arabic letters in the sand during a rest stop, showing a curious traveler how calligraphy itself can be a form of devotion. The lines flow like rivers, each stroke deliberate. A Christian trader watches, then pulls a small icon from his pack, a painted Christ on wood, faded by years of travel. For a moment, the desert becomes a gallery, scriptures and images laid side by side, none louder than the other. You imagine how confusing and wonderful this must seem to those who've never left their villages. To walk one road and encounter sutras, Qur'ans, and Gospels all within a mile. The debates here aren't just about peppercorns versus pebbles, but about salvation, enlightenment, and the nature of truth. You sip water and decide you're not qualified to referee. The caravan pauses again at noon, and beneath a thin strip of shade, you find yourself surrounded by conversations that weave together like the silk in the packs. A Persian poet recites verses about love and longing. A Central Asian storyteller responds with a legend of a hero who battled sand demons armed only with a jug of water. The parrot interrupts by whistling inappropriately at a passing mule, ruining the solemn mood. Third joke of the section. You declare that the bird is clearly founding its own religion, one based entirely on heckling. The merchants laugh, grateful for levity. You realize this exchange is more than entertainment. It's survival of another kind, the mind's survival. Without these songs, poems, and stories, the desert would devour not only your body, but your spirit. You begin to understand why scholars argue that the true treasure of the Silk Roads wasn't silk at all, but this constant intermingling of thought. At night, when fires flicker, the caravan turns into a classroom. One man teaches how to count using Indian numerals, jotting symbols in the sand that feel suspiciously easier than the Roman ones you remember. Another explains the healing power of rhubarb again, always rhubarb, while someone else insists the stars prove fate is written. The debate stretched long into the night, voices rising, laughter cutting through the darkness. Historians still argue whether these exchanges were casual or organized, whether merchants truly paused to share their beliefs, or whether most were too busy counting coins. But watching tonight, it feels natural. The road is long, the desert cruel, and the only way to endure is to carry more than goods. You carry prayers, philosophies, and jokes. As you lie back, the stars pricking overhead, you remember the Buddhist chant, the Arabic letters, the painted icon. You smile, realizing you've walked a mile in more than one world today. Survival isn't only about water skins and camels. It's also about keeping your spirit alive with the words and songs of strangers who for a few nights feel like family. You wake to whispers that don't sound like gossip about wool prices or jokes about parrot droppings. These voices are lower, sharper, the kind that coil around fires in the corner of a courtyard. You shuffle closer and realize you're not listening to merchants this time, but envoys. Their robes are plain, their camels few, yet their importance weighs heavier than any bundle of silk. They are the diplomats, traveling the same road as traders, but carrying something more volatile than spices, treaties. They sit cross-legged, bowls of sticky rice between them, speaking in careful tones. Mainstream fact, the Silk Roads weren't only trade routes, but also diplomatic corridors. Chinese emperors sent embassies west, while Persian and Arab rulers dispatched envoys eastward. Sometimes they carried tribute, sometimes threats disguised as gifts. Quirky tidbit, records tell of envoys bearing golden peaches carved from solid metal, a gift meant to symbolize eternal harvests. Historians still argue whether such extravagant gifts were actually delivered or if chroniclers exaggerated for drama. But you imagine someone's poor camel groaning under the absurd weight of a peach no one could ever eat. The men tonight don't carry golden fruit. Instead, one unrolls a scroll, written in elegant script, the paper thin as breath. He gestures to clauses about safe passage, grain tariffs, and promises of military support. The others nod, frown, argue. Every phrase seems balanced on a knife edge. One misplaced word could mean an army marches instead of a caravan. You sip weak tea, pretending not to eavesdrop, but it's hard not to when the air feels so charged. One envoy mutters that a rival ruler demands tribute in silk bolts. Another insists that gold should be enough. The debate circles endlessly. You think about yesterday's market haggling and realize that diplomacy is just bargaining with higher stakes. At one point, a nervous young attendant drops a grain of rice onto the treaty scroll. Everyone gasps as though the document itself has been wounded. Third joke of the section. You whisper to yourself, well, that's one way to add flavor to negotiations. Luckily, no one hears, or you might be accused of international sabotage by condiments. As the night deepens, the talk shifts from tariffs to alliances. One envoy mentions a border skirmish, another warns of nomadic raids. You watch their faces lit by firelight, tired, intent, cautious. You realize these men will never appear in epic poems, yet their quiet bargaining shapes the maps the poems will be set upon. Historians still argue how much influence such traveling diplomats truly had. Were they powerful negotiators or just glorified couriers delivering pre-written orders? Tonight, they seem both. Messengers, yes, but also improvisers, smoothing rough edges so armies don't march tomorrow. The caravan treats them with deference, but also caution. Diplomats bring protection, but they also attract attention. A bandit chief might ignore a pack of wool, but not a pouch of state seals. You catch the leader casting wary glances at the horizon, as though diplomacy glows too brightly in the dark. By dawn, the scroll is rolled again, tucked into its case, its words unchanged but its meaning reshaped by hours of murmured compromise. The envoys bow, share another bowl of rice, and climb onto their camels. They will vanish into the same horizon you're trudging toward, carrying words that could ignite or extinguish wars. As you shoulder your pack, you realize survival on the Silk Roads is never just about weather, food, or thirst. It's also about politics, about walking carefully while empires whisper above your head. And just like the merchants haggling over peppercorns, rulers haggling over treaties know the truth. The road itself survives everyone, while the people on it merely pass through. The caravan slows as the land begins to change. The flat monotony of sand gives way to scrub and rock, and with it comes the sound of life, chirps, rustles, and the occasional unsettling hiss. You've grown used to camels and parrots, But now, the desert reminds you that it is not empty. It teems quietly with creatures far better suited to survival than you. A guide points to a ripple in the sand, a pattern like someone dragging a piece of rope. Moments later, a snake slides into view, its scales gleaming like polished bronze. Mainstream fact: vipers and cobras were indeed hazards along certain Silk Road stretches, often camouflaged so perfectly they were stepped on before noticed. Quirky tidbit: travelers sometimes carried mongoose bones as charms against snakebite, believing they worked like talismans. Historians still argue whether such charms were superstition or symbolic reminders to stay cautious. You, meanwhile, decide to stare at your feet with renewed intensity. Camels grunt but step on unconcerned, their thick hides form a natural armor. Horses shy away nervously, hooves stamping, as if they sense doom in every shadow. You shuffle carefully, imagining the healer back in camp, bragging about his miracle garlic salt poultice for bites, and praying you never have to test it. Later, a small herd of gazelles appears on a distant ridge. They move like water, leaping, pausing, then vanishing before your eyes. The caravan halts briefly, everyone admiring the sight. For a moment you forget thirst, bandits, and blisters. You feel something like gratitude that even here, where survival is a constant negotiation, beauty still sprints across the horizon. As evening approaches, the air cools, and beetles begin their nightly parade. They crawl with single-minded determination into boots, saddlebags, and anywhere else inconvenient. Third joke of the section: you mutter, "If beetles are the true landlords of the desert, then we're just paying rent in sand." And your neighbor chuckles while shaking one out of his shoe. Around the fire, stories rise about stranger beasts. One merchant swears he saw a wolf the size of a donkey prowling near a ruined watchtower. Another insists a desert spirit in the shape of a lion follows travelers at dusk, testing their courage. The guides roll their eyes, but they still stoke the fire higher. Survival isn't only about fending off what's real, it's also about appeasing what you fear might be. Historians still argue whether tales of monstrous creatures, giant snakes, fire-breathing birds, or sand demons were exaggerated travelers' tales or metaphors for more ordinary dangers. Listening tonight, you realize it doesn't matter. The stories keep everyone alert, and sometimes alertness is the difference between a snake bite and another mile of safe walking. Before sleep, you watch a scarab beetle push a ball of sand with stubborn determination, its tiny legs working against gravity. It seems ridiculous, yet strangely admirable. You smile, realizing that in a way, you're not so different, hauling your own burdens across a vast, indifferent landscape. The beetle doesn't complain, doesn't bargain, doesn't fear bandits. It just keeps rolling forward. Perhaps that's the true secret of survival here. You close your eyes to the sound of insects clicking, camels sighing, and the faint rustle of unseen creatures claiming the night. The desert hums with life, some beautiful, some dangerous, some comical. And you, for now, are still part of its strange chorus. The road grows musical long before you spot an instrument. It begins with the bell on the lead camel, a small, deliberate clink that keeps the line stitched together, like a metronome sewn to the desert sleeve. Then the voices rise. Low at first, no words, only breath shaped in a tone. Drivers hum while they walk, and the hum spreads, the way a yawn crosses a crowded room, until the whole caravan seems to vibrate at one lazy pitch. Your shoulders drop a little. Even the parrot, tireless critic of everything, tucks its head and listens. A guide beside you clears his throat and slides into a melody with steps built in. 2 long notes, 3 short, a held tone that lands soft as heel then toe. It's for pacing, he murmurs. Feet follow what ears believe. Mainstream fact: along caravan routes from Arabia into Central Asia, camel drivers kept time with work songs, the huda and its cousins, rhythms that eased loads and synchronized steps so animals didn't stumble into one another. The beat was as much a tool as any rope. Quirky tidbit: singers swore some tunes made camels walk faster, so with pregnant animals they changed melodies, like switching the spice in the stew to keep it gentle. Historians still argue whether the songs truly altered the animal's gait, or mostly calmed the humans who led them, though your feet, traders that they are, begin to match the tune anyway. At the noon halt, a musician unstraps a long-necked lute, 2 strings and a skin-covered bowl. He plucks a phrase that sounds like cool water poured from a high jug. The sound gathers shade where there isn't any. Another traveler joins with a reed flute, the breathy neigh you've heard in city courtyards, but never out here, where each note feels like it's dissolving into salt. The two trade lines the way merchants trade compliments, cautiously at first, then with delighted exaggeration. A frame drum comes out, a daff ringed with little rings, its pulse as soft as a hand on a sleeping child's back. You notice the animals. Camels shift, fold their knees, and chew in slow approval. Horses flick their ears toward the sound, then stand strangely still, as if a stubborn itch has finally scratched itself. You grin, then attempt to clap along. Your rhythm arrives late and leaves early. One camel swivels its head and gives you a stare so withering you lower your hands at once. First joke, congratulations. Your first review from a desert critic, and it's a 1-hump rating. When the sun leans west, the caravan moves again, music folded back into motion. The bell resumes its thread, and the drivers sing in turns. One lags, another answers. The rest drone like a pleasant hive. Lyrics are practical poetry. Left foot, right foot, soft sand, firm sand, water ahead if memory keeps its promise. Between verses, the flute stitches little bridges, quick as sparrows. You'd pay good coin for a yawn right now, but the tunes keep you at that perfect edge of drowsy and steady, the bedside story you must walk through. A mural you once glimpsed at a city shrine drifts into memory. Dancers in floating sleeves, a pipa tilted forward, a mouth organ like a cluster of reeds. Mainstream fact, the Mogao caves near Dunhuang preserve paintings of Sogdian and Chinese musicians, lutes, flutes, drums, even the angular Konghu harp. Evidence that performers, instruments, and repertoires braided together where caravans paused. You think of those painted sleeves fluttering forever and realize today's tune might be a cousin to something a painter heard 1,000 years ago. Historians still argue whether musical scales traveled intact along the routes or morphed town by town like accents. Either way, your ear keeps catching familiar turns in unfamiliar clothes. At twilight, the instruments come out again. A different musician sets a small bowl on the ground, flips it mouth down, and taps its bronze with finger bones, a little river of clicks. Another shakes a gourd rattle that whispers rather than shouts, shh, like wind seen from far away. The drum deepens to a heartbeat, then softens to a suggestion. The flute lays a line across it, and the lute trails after, reluctant to be left alone. Second joke, you lean toward the parrot's cage and whisper, requests. The bird blinks slyly, then repeats a 2-note motif it picked up at last night's rehearsal, perfectly in time. The flautist hears, smiles, and builds a whole variation around the bird's tiny arrogance. For once the parrot looks surprised, like a heckler whose insult became the chorus. The music is work, yes, but also a map for moods. On steep slopes the rhythms shorten, asking for smaller steps. On flat, firm stretches, the phrases lengthen, promising that even the horizon can be outwalked if you hum politely at it. During a water check, the leader nods to the drummer, who drops to a low, slow pulse. Time to sip, not gulp, to breathe, not boast. Listen, the leader says, tapping his ear. The drum remembers what our tongues forget. You ask the flautist where he learned. Everywhere, he says, and points in a ragged circle that means oasis, temple, bazaar, and road. He's traded melodies the way others trade almonds. One maqam for a winter song, one bridal air for a shepherd's round. He shows you a scale that dips shyly, then rises like a camel standing. Your mouth tries to imitate it and produces something that sounds like a kettle dying. Third joke. He bows gravely, declares you've invented a new mode, the squeaking boot, and the circle applauds as if you meant it. Night pulls up its cool blanket. Stars reveal themselves by the handful, and the music thins to a narrow thread, more felt than heard. You lie back on your bundle and realize these tunes are the soft skills of survival. They measure steps, borrow patience, soften fear. Even when songs name dangers, sand that moves like snakes, wells that lose their way, they do it kindly, like parents telling bedtime stories about wolves with good table manners. Quirky again, because you can't help it. One driver insists his grandfather sang a lullaby to a particularly stubborn camel, the same lullaby used for babies, and that the animal, flattered, stopped spitting at everyone for a week. Historians still argue whether this grandfather existed or if every caravan has simply invented him on long evenings. But you secretly store the melody in case you ever need to flatter a ship of the desert. As the last phrase fades, someone tucks the lute back into its worn cloth, the flute slides into a reed case, and the drum sleeps face down like a moon hiding behind a dune. The bell on the lead camel gives one final clink, a goodnight kiss to the line. In the hush that follows, you can hear your own breath match the tempo the drummer set a minute ago. Slow in, slower out. Your feet, traitorous and loyal, relax by instinct, as if they've been promised a kinder road tomorrow. You think of all the odd protections you've collected. Buttered camel ears, crocodile dung sunscreen that shall not be named, beetle-proof boot rituals, rhubarb tea that tastes like penitence. Add this to the kit, a tune with steady hips and patient shoulders. On the silk roads, not every tool rides in a saddlebag. Some are hummed between clenched teeth and shared without a price. The song isn't about winning the desert, it's about walking with it until the desert forgets to fight you. Sleep comes lightly, draped in flute breath and drum echo. Somewhere, the parrot rehearses its two perfect notes in a dream. Somewhere, a camel choosing a 4x4 time. You smile into your scarf and let the road's soft music finish its work, one slow bar at a time. Dawn creeps over the desert like someone pulling back a sheet too early, and you groan as the cold slips away, replaced by the promise of blistering heat. You tug on your robe and feel the grit in its seams, every fiber stiff with sweat and dust. The truth becomes clear. Survival here isn't only about food or water, it's about what you wear. Clothing is armor, shelter, and sometimes the only thing standing between you and being roasted like yesterday's goat. The caravan leader's outfit looks plain at first. Layers of wool, linen, and cotton in dull browns. But you soon realize it's genius. Loose enough to trap air, heavy enough to shield skin, long enough to cover wrists and ankles. Mainstream fact. Desert travelers wore layers of light-colored cloth to insulate against heat by day and cold by night, often wrapping turbans or scarves around their faces to block sand. Quirky tidbit. Some records suggest that merchants rubbed their clothes with sesame oil to make dust slide off more easily. Historians still argue whether this actually worked or just left everyone smelling like a fried snack. You sniff the man beside you and decide perhaps both. You, of course, are less prepared. Your scarf slips constantly. Your robe is too short, and the sun finds every gap with unerring accuracy. By mid-morning, the top of your head feels like a skillet. One merchant kindly hands you an extra turban cloth and shows you how to wrap it, layer after layer, until only your eyes peek out. You mutter that you feel like a wrapped date, and he chuckles, muttering, "A date survives the desert better than most people." Fashion, you realize, is less about style than practicality. Women in the caravan wear layered gowns, colorful but sturdy, some with embroidered hems that somehow remain immaculate despite the sand. A few even wear jewelry, bracelets and beads that jingle softly as they walk. You wonder aloud if that isn't impractical. One laughs and says, "Jewelry doesn't spoil in the sun." You can't argue with logic like that. Footwear becomes another battlefield. Your sandals are already fraying, the straps chafing raw patches on your heels. You watch veterans shake their shoes before putting them on, an act you once thought superstitious until you remembered the Beatles. One man boasts that his boots are lined with felt to keep the sand out. You look down at your feet and sigh. Third joke of the section. You whisper that you'd sell half your rations for socks that don't crunch when you walk. The parrot overhears and repeats, "Crunch socks," until everyone is laughing. Clothing also carries status. A Persian merchant wears robes of deep indigo, dyed so richly that even dust can't dull them. A Chinese envoy's silks gleam faintly, hinting at privilege. The caravan's guides, by contrast, are wrapped in plain wool and leather patched a dozen times. Yet it's the guides who walk most comfortably, their clothes worn into second skin. Historians still argue whether wealthy travelers dressed down on the road to avoid bandit attention, or if displays of luxury were too valuable to hide. Looking at the glittering sleeves of one proud noblewoman, you suspect vanity won the debate. As the sun climbs, you feel grateful for every scrap of cloth covering your skin. Without it, your arms would already be blistering. By late afternoon, the wind shifts and the temperature drops sharply. Suddenly, you're shivering in the same robes that roasted you earlier. You pull your scarf tighter, realizing the desert plays its tricks through temperature as much as sandstorms. Layers, not bravery, are the only defense. At night, clothing transforms again. Scarves become pillows, cloaks become blankets, and boots serve as storage lockers for small valuables you don't want stolen. The stars glitter above, but you barely notice. You're too busy hugging your cloak around you, as though it were stitched from fire itself. You drift towards sleep, thinking of how odd it is that survival can depend on something as simple as a strip of cloth. In the desert, armor isn't made of iron, but of linen, wool, and the patience to shake beetles out of your shoes. The fire crackles low tonight, and for once you notice voices higher than the merchants. Women in the caravan gather near the flames, their laughter threading through the air like a softer kind of music. You've seen them every day, walking beside the animals, carrying water jars, balancing children on their hips. But only now, in the stillness, do you realize how much of this survival story is theirs too. A noblewoman sits slightly apart, her robes heavy with embroidery that glimmers even under soot-smudged light. She has attendants fussing at her sleeves, brushing sand from the hems, though you suspect they gave up hours ago. Mainstream fact: noblewomen did sometimes travel along the Silk Roads, either to join their husbands, to return home after marriage alliances, or to serve as emissaries themselves. Quirky tidbit. One chronicle mentions a princess traveling with a separate caravan that carried nothing but her dowry furniture, chests, cushions, even carved screens. Historians still argue whether that was a typical luxury or a singular case exaggerated for gossip. Looking at this woman's stoic face, you'd think even she might have traded a silk cushion for a clean bucket of water. Closer to the center, women of humbler means share bread, hands moving deftly as they mend torn robes and patch packs. One crafts a sandal strap from camel hide, slicing and knotting as though she's done it 100 times. Another weaves reeds into a mat to keep grain sacks off the sand. You realize these are the quiet repairs that keep a caravan from unraveling. Children tumble nearby, squealing softly so as not to attract reprimands. A girl no older than 8 sits beside her mother, stringing beads into a necklace. She grins proudly when it holds together, the bright glass catching firelight. You smile back, knowing she's just made her first piece of desert jewelry, a treasure more valuable to her than porcelain. And then come the stories. One woman leans forward, her voice husky from dust, and begins a tale about an ancestor who once faced down a sandstorm with only a scarf and sheer stubbornness. Another chimes in with a legend of a river goddess who blessed caravans led by women, ensuring they never lost their way. The men chuckle but listen too, because out here superstition is as useful as maps. Third joke of the section. You whisper to the parrot that perhaps women should lead every caravan, given that men keep getting lost. The bird screeches, "Lost! Lost!" until everyone laughs, including the noblewoman herself. You notice how women are also the keepers of small comforts. A pot of millet porridge bubbles gently, stirred by a hand that knows just when to add honey. A scrap of cloth becomes a doll for a child. A lullaby hums low, half asleep, wrapping the camp in something softer than the cold. Historians still argue how prominent women were in caravan life, whether they were rare companions or integral participants. Watching tonight, you know the answer. They are indispensable, invisible only when someone chooses not to see. Later, as the fire dwindles, a young craftswoman threads colored wool into camel halters, her fingers quick, her eyes bright. She mutters that the desert spirits hate plain ropes, so colors must be woven in to keep animals safe. You're not sure if it's true, but you catch yourself hoping your camel gets a bright blue tassel tomorrow. You roll into your blanket, the women's voices still brushing the night like quiet wind. They speak of husbands, of children, of markets they hope to see. One hums again, and the tune drifts like smoke toward the stars. You close your eyes, realizing that survival here is not only measured in water skins and bales of silk. It's measured in the steady hands that man straps, the stories told to banish fear, and the soft songs that convince you the desert isn't as cruel as it looks. The desert doesn't bother with moderation. It gives you all or nothing, furnace heat by day, bone-gnawing chill by night. As the caravan shuffles forward, you feel like you've stumbled into a world where the sun and moon are locked in a contest to see who can make you most uncomfortable. By mid-morning, the air presses down like hot iron. Every breath sears. Your robe sticks to your back, your scarf damp with sweat. The animals pant, mouths foaming slightly, their tongues lolling. Mainstream fact: desert travelers often marched in the early morning and evening, resting during the midday blaze because temperatures could soar above 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Celsius. Quirky tidbit. Some accounts mention placing wet cloths on camels' humps, a gesture more symbolic than practical, like giving an umbrella to a volcano. Historians still argue whether caravans truly stopped completely at midday or pressed on when schedules were tight. Judging by the sweat dripping into your eyes, you silently root for stop completely. Shade is a rare blessing. You huddle under the slanted wall of a ruined watchtower, sharing its cool shadow with 3 camels and half the merchant band. The air is so still it feels like drinking from a heated cup. Someone mutters that the sun today is angry because you didn't sacrifice enough beetles. Third joke of the section, you groan. If beetles are the rent we owe the desert, I've already paid a year's lease in my boots. The parrot, half asleep, croaks, rent boots, and somehow makes everyone laugh even in this oven. When the sun finally sinks, relief comes fast. Shadows stretch, wind rises, and suddenly you're shivering. The same robe that roasted you hours ago now feels too thin. You pull it tight, fingers stiff. Camels snort clouds into the cold air, while horses tremble and huddle closer to the fires. The stars blaze sharp, mocking your lack of insulation. Mainstream fact: the Central Asian deserts are notorious for extreme daily swings, with differences of more than 30 degrees Celsius, 55 degrees Celsius, between day and night. Travelers had to carry blankets and cloaks, even while sweating under them hours earlier. Quirky tidbit: one chronicler claimed that frost could form on water skins at dawn, even after a sweltering day. Historians still argue whether this was exaggeration or reality, but your numb toes suggest it's at least half true. You wrap your scarf around your head and try to sleep, but the cold gnaws like mice at your bones. Someone tosses another log into the fire. Its crackle is the most comforting sound you've heard all day. Others share body heat, sleeping back to back. You hesitate, then scoot closer to the nearest camel, whose side radiates warmth like a reluctant stove. The beast grumbles but doesn't kick. You whisper a thank you and drift off, with your face pressed into fur that smells faintly of hay and dust. Historians still argue whether travelers considered these extremes the worst part of the Silk Roads. Bandits, sandstorms, and thirst are terrifying, but at least they arrive dramatically. Temperature just sneaks in, quietly undoing you while you're too tired to fight. The veterans shrug when asked. You learn, they say, but you notice even they shiver under their cloaks at night and curse the sun by noon. As dawn creeps back, frost glitters on your blanket. You rub your hands, marveling at the cruel joke of it all. The same desert that nearly cooked you yesterday has left you with numb fingers this morning. You stand, stretch, and prepare for another round of the sun and moon endurance game. Somehow, despite everything, you're still here. The storm has passed, the bandits gone, the wells mercifully filled, and yet the desert offers you another puzzle: direction. Out here, the sand itself seems to conspire against memory. Trails vanish in a single gust, cairns collapse, and the horizon repeats itself like a bad joke. You trudge along, realizing that survival isn't just about walking forward, it's about knowing where forward even is. The guides lead with calm you don't quite trust. They stop often, squatting low, brushing their palms across the ground like readers of a braille text only they understand. Mainstream fact: Silk Road caravans relied heavily on memory, local knowledge, and landmarks such as mountain ridges, ancient beacon towers, or even distinctive dunes. Quirky tidbit: some records describe travelers tying knots in ropes, counting steps in hours, then comparing them against star positions at night, an early form of GPS powered by sore feet. Historians still argue whether these step-counting ropes were widely used or just mentioned in a few tales. Looking at the frayed cord dangling from one guide's belt, you wonder if it's superstition or science. At noon, the heat rises, and the horizon wavers with mirages. Pools of water shimmer, blue as jewels, only to dissolve when you blink. A few new travelers lurch toward them before veterans pull them back. You joke weakly, maybe it's just the desert showing us an advertisement for tomorrow's oasis. Third joke of the section: the parrot, clearly inspired, squawks, "Bye now," and the entire caravan dissolves into weary laughter. The guides consult scraps of parchment marked with blotches of ink that could be wells, villages, or just spills. One points to the sun, mutters a string of words that sound like a prayer, and steers you left instead of right. You follow because there is nothing else to do. Direction here isn't democratic, it's faith dressed up as memory. That evening, under stars, the real work begins. The leader lifts an astrolabe, bronze, battered, but still gleaming. He measures Polaris's height, murmurs to himself, then scratches lines in the sand with a stick. Others lean in, debating softly, each tracing imaginary routes with their fingers. You catch words like pass, ruin, and riverbed. It feels like a council of wizards, but instead of spells, they trade half-remembered maps. Mainstream fact: remnants of beacon towers and watch posts, built centuries before by Han emperors or local dynasties, still dotted these routes, giving travelers fixed points to anchor their journeys. Quirky tidbit: one account says some towers were stocked with pigeons for emergency messages. Tiny feathered couriers carrying scraps of news across the sand. Historians still argue how reliable such systems really were. Perhaps they worked only when someone remembered to feed the birds. You glance upward, half expecting a pigeon to drop by with directions. None appear. The next morning, the caravan nearly veers into disaster. The dune line has shifted overnight, erasing the faint ridge path you followed yesterday. A murmur of worry ripples through the group. The leader kneels, picks up a pebble, and licks it. You raise an eyebrow. He declares the wind came from the west. The pebble tastes of grit blown from a dry lake bed. You're not sure whether to be impressed or horrified. Still, the caravan pivots east, and within hours you spot the faint outline of a ruined tower, confirming he was right. By nightfall, your confidence in maps and memory grows. Not because you understand them, but because you've seen the guides read stars, sand, and even stones like fluent text. You stretch out under the glittering sky, whispering thanks to Polaris, to ropes with knots, and maybe even to pigeons that never arrived. Survival on the Silk Roads is not just endurance, it's navigation. And sometimes, the difference between being lost and being alive is nothing more than someone who remembers which pebble tastes of lake dust. The next morning, the caravan halts before a stone arch spanning the road, its paint long gone but its purpose obvious. Guards lean against spears, yawning as though survival itself is boring work. A wooden chest sits between them, lid propped open. Inside, coins clinking faintly, a pile of silver and copper that smells of sweat and resignation. You've arrived at one of the least glamorous but most consistent features of the Silk Roads: taxes and tolls. The leader steps forward, pouch in hand. He argues politely but firmly, pointing at stamped papers, gesturing toward the goods. The guards shrug, unimpressed. Mainstream fact: caravans often paid multiple tolls on a single journey, levied by local rulers, governors, or even opportunistic tribes controlling stretches of road. Quirky tidbit: there are records of toll keepers charging by the hoof, 1 coin per camel leg, which meant 4 coins per animal. Historians still argue whether that was a real practice or satire scribbled by a frustrated traveler. Watching the guards count slowly, you wouldn't put it past them. Each merchant groans in turn, dropping coins into the chest. Some grumble, some mutter prayers. One theatrically sighs as if depositing his very soul. You, with little to offer, slip a single coin and feel oddly lighter. Not in your purse, but in your chest. Paying the toll means moving forward, and moving forward is priceless. Of course, corruption colors the ritual. One guard pockets a coin with practiced subtlety. Another eyes a spice sack with too much interest. A deal is struck quietly. 2 handfuls of pepper instead of 10 silver pieces. You wonder whether this is bribery or just alternative taxation. Third joke of the section. You whisper to the parrot, "At this rate, pepper will be the new currency." And the bird immediately shrieks, "Pepper pay! Pepper pay!" until the guards glare and everyone chuckles nervously. Past the gate, the caravan trudges into another toll station by sunset. This one is less formal. A cluster of tents, a rope strung across the path, and a group of men playing dice. They glance up lazily, demand payment, and return to their game. The leader sighs and pays again. The dice clatter, and you can't help wondering if your journey is less about geography than about funding every gambler between here and Bukhara. Mainstream fact: some rulers deliberately maintained and protected trade routes, using taxes to repair wells, caravansaries, and even guard towers. Others simply milked passing merchants for personal wealth, offering nothing in return. Historians still argue which approach was more common, but your aching feet suspect the latter. By night, merchants gather around the fire to vent. One swears that the tolls cost more than the camels. Another insists he once paid 3 times in a single day, once to a prince, once to a rebel, and once to a bandit who called himself Prince. Everyone laughs, though the laughter has sharp edges. You realize that tolls are just another desert hazard, like sandstorms or thirst. Less dramatic, but equally draining. As you lie down, you replay the image of coins clinking into the chest. Each one marks the caravan's progress, a silver breadcrumb trail stretching across the desert. You wonder how much of the Silk Road's history is etched not in battles or treaties, but in the steady sound of toll keepers yawning as they counted other people's survival. The road feels different today, not because of sand or stars, but because another caravan appears on the horizon. At first, it's only a blur of dust, but soon the shapes sharpen. Camels in lines, riders in bright robes, banners fluttering lazily. As they draw closer, your group tenses. Rival caravans are both comfort and competition. Proof you're not alone, but also a reminder that every bale of silk and jar of pepper you carry is racing toward the same market. The 2 leaders greet one another with stiff bows, smiling thinly. Words are exchanged. Pleasantries first, then the subtle probing. Where did you come from? How many days on the road? Any bandits ahead? The answers are polite, but everyone knows the truth. Both groups are calculating who will sell first, who will fetch the higher prices. Mainstream fact: caravans often traveled in clusters, sometimes emerging temporarily for safety, sometimes competing bitterly for the same buyers at the next city. Quirky tidbit: some accounts describe rival caravans deliberately spreading false rumors, claiming wells were dry, bandits rampant, or markets saturated, in order to slow others down. Historians still argue how much of this was genuine sabotage or just travelers' paranoia. Watching the tight smiles now, you suspect both. The two groups camped near each other that evening, fires sparking in opposite corners like rival constellations. Your merchants talk loudly about their superior pepper, hoping the sound drifts to the other camp. From across the way, you hear counterbrags about silk so fine it could slip through a ring. The parrot, unable to resist, screeches, "Better silk! Better silk!" at precisely the wrong moment, and both camps burst out laughing. Third joke of the section. You whisper that the bird deserves its own merchant license, and someone actually nods. But rivalry doesn't cancel community. Soon the two camps mingle cautiously. A game of dice springs up, laughter bridging suspicion. A singer from their side brings out a rebob, its bow rasping sweetly, and one of your flutists joins in. Children chase each other across the invisible border, their giggles unconcerned with market competition. You notice even the camels seem relieved to see strangers. They grunt and sniff, as though comparing notes on which humans are the worst handlers. Still, beneath the warmth, the rivalry simmers. Traders inspect each other's goods discreetly, eyes narrowing. One man asks far too many questions about your porcelain. Another examines your bolts of wool with exaggerated disdain. You catch a few merchants whispering strategies. Which city to reach first? Which markets to avoid? Historians still argue whether caravans saw each other as partners in survival or as threats to profit. Judging by tonight, the answer is both. Safety in numbers, suspicion in whispers. Perhaps that balance is what kept the Silk Roads alive. Cooperation against the desert, competition at the market. When morning comes, the rival caravan departs a few hours earlier, bells jangling with smug determination. Your leader watches, lips tight, then calls for an early departure as well. Suddenly, the road feels like a race. You walk faster, joking that survival now includes not just water and food, but beating the neighbors to the next bazaar. Night gathers like a careful storyteller, and the veterans do what veterans always do when the fire burns low. They turn the road into a warning. You pull your cloak tighter, lean in, and the desert itself seems to hush so the old tales can walk through. The rivalry with yesterday's caravan, the tolls, the bargaining, those were the noisy parts of survival. What comes next is quiet and enormous. The memory of disasters that chose their victims without malice, the way dunes choose their shapes. A gray-bearded guy taps ash from a twig and begins with snow, because the desert's favorite trick is pretending it only knows heat. He describes a caravan inching over a high pass, animals strung like beads across the white. Then the sky collapsed, not gently, not with romance, just a bulldozer of wind and ice, a blindfold over the world. Men tied ropes from waist to waist. The rope froze so stiff it stood like a fence when the wind paused. They dug pits with bowls, made islands in the storm, and sang so they could find each other when their voices shrank in the gale. In the morning, the snow had erased their footprints as if the caravan were a rumor. Mainstream fact. Blizzards in the Tian Shan and Pamir ranges could bury wayfarers by the dozen. Passes that looked passable at noon turned lethal by dusk. Even in desert journeys, routes wound through mountains where frost killed faster than thirst. Quirky tidbit. Some old hands swore by smudging soot beneath the eyes, like coal for warriors, to tame snow glare and stave off snow blindness. Others rubbed noses with ghee and wrapped them in felt so they wouldn't freeze. Historians still argue whether these tricks were widespread good sense or campfire bravado, but the guide's face, rutted by years of wind, makes you think somebody tried everything once. He pauses, then gestures to the sand that hems your circle. Snow takes you quick, he says. Sand takes you slow. Another story unfolds, a trail across the Taklamakan marked by low cairns and tamarisk stumps. A Karaboran, black wind, rose at noon, a wall of grit swallowing noon itself. The caravan did the right thing. Cloaks over heads, animals kneeling, bells muffled. When the wind died, the world was new. The ridgeline was somewhere else now, under a smooth ocean of beige. They walked by Star and Faith, but the well they aimed for had moved. Not truly moved, of course, but buried its mouth like a turtle retreats. They found it only because a generations old palm pole marker still poked 2 handspans above the drift, a ridiculous finger pointing at water that was not where memory swore it should be. You feel the old panic rise in your ribs, even in safety. What if our next well goes shy? You glance at your water skin the way you used to glance at your phone battery. Same prayer, different century. First joke, you whisper to the parrot's crate, "Please tell me you can sniff springs." And the bird replies with impeccable timing, "Nope." The kind of honesty you didn't need, and everyone snorts in spite of themselves. Another merchant takes up the tail thread. He speaks of a city erased, because disaster isn't always a storm. Sometimes it's a river changing its mind. He names a place out in the Tarim Basin where streets once wore sandal prints and courtyards sang with bucket ropes. Then the water wandered, and the wind finished the job. Houses filled with powder-fine sand, roofs exhaled, and doors opened onto nothing. Travelers wandered through centuries later and found bowls still stacked, a spindle by a window, and footprints that stopped at a wall of dune like punctuation. Mainstream fact, softened for sleep, oases on these routes lived and died with fickle rivers. Places like Lulan bloomed and vanished, leaving timbers, textiles, and the faint geometry of streets under restless sand. Historians still argue whether climate shifts or politics killed Witchtown first. The wind characteristically declines to comment. Someone across the flames adds a smaller disaster. A well poisoned, not by malice, by salt. The bucket came up sparkling as a jewel, and half the camp drank before tongues remembered its taste. The night that followed was a parade of curses and regret. The healer made tea from everything except actual tea. Your stomach clenches in sympathy at the memory of his rhubarb lectures. If survival has a flavor, it's bitter and convinced of its own virtue. Second joke, you murmur, rhubarb, patron saint of bad decisions, and even the healer chuckles, which you count as both absolution and scientific review. The guide with the ash twig circles back to snow, because these tales loop like trails. He speaks of bells that saved lives, how some drivers tied a second bell under the camel's chest, so, if a drift swallowed beast and man, the muffled clang would tell the others where to dig. He says they made shoulder ladders from tent poles, lashed 2 by 2, to crawl over avalanche slabs as if crossing a pond on thin ice. Quirky again, perhaps. One old teamster swore by carrying a painted kite in the passes. If the wind launched it, you turned back. Historians still argue whether the kite story is clever folklore or a drunk uncle of meteorology. But in a world where onions once defended eyeballs and butter saved ears, your tolerance for maybe has grown generous. You're waiting for the bandit and arrows disaster, the movie version of Loss, but the veterans keep giving you arithmetic instead. 1 missed marker, 1 careless noon, 1 extra mile after dusk, and the desert writes subtract in a hand you can't erase. A quiet man across from you finally speaks. The sword who notices pebbles that taste like lake beds. He says his worst day wasn't storm, snow, or salt. It was heat plus a delay. A sandal strap snapped. You check yours reflexively, remembering your vow to barter for non-crunch socks. And the pause stretched 20 minutes. 20 minutes meant the next shade came 20 minutes later. 2 animals faltered. A third refused to kneel at rest. 1 mistake multiplies out here like a parable nobody enjoys hearing. Third joke arrives like a needed exhale. A young driver claims his uncle once buried the wrong cargo during a storm, shoved jars of honey under sand to fetch later, and dug up pickled turnips by mistake 3 days on. We had sweet pickles for a week, he sighs, and no honey left for tea. The parrot who knows comedy's math squawks, sweet pickles, and the circle erupts. The desert listens, bemused. When the laughter thins, the moral remains. People leave signs for themselves in a place determined to tidy them away. Poles, cairns, bells, songs, soot stripes, felt-wrapped noses, painted kites, each a pencil line on a page the wind keeps trying to turn. You think of all your own little rituals since this journey began, checking knots twice, shaking boots for beetle landlords, tucking coin under your mat, buttering camel ears, in theory, and treating maps like gossip that might still be true. A last voice, the quietest, tells one more thing. Sometimes the disaster is patience failing. A rival caravan passes. The urge to keep up overrides the urge to sit in shade. You walk into the worst hour because pride bends your feet. Remember, he says, we're not racing the sand. We're asking it to forget we're here. You picture yesterday's banners flapping off at dawn, and you feel the advice settle like a cool cloth on a fevered plan. You bed down with the stories nesting in you like small, reasonable birds. No gore, no heroics. Just the careful math of doing things on time and in order. The stars look like a ledger written in silver. Debits, heat, wind, thirst, and credits. Shade, wells, songs. In a corner of the courtyard, the parrot mutters itself to sleep, practicing sweet pickles and nope like protective charms. The fire sinks into red coals. You roll onto your side, cloak snug, and let the old disasters keep their proper distance. Close enough to warn, far enough to soften and to lessen. The desert does not remember faces, only footprints. With luck, yours will be the kind even a good wind fails to erase by morning. You wake before dawn, the desert still asleep under its thin blanket of chill. The sky's a pale gray canvas waiting for the brushstroke of sunrise, and the caravan stirs with the same quiet reluctance as you do. Camels groan like reluctant students pulled from bed, ropes creak, and fire embers are coaxed back to life. Today's march is not about crossing sand or snow, but about reaching a place where survival is bought with conversation instead of water. The checkpoint. The Silk Roads were not just empty lines across wilderness. They were dotted with gatekeepers, tax collectors, and self-appointed bosses who decided whether your bales passed smoothly or your patience bled out over forms and fees. Mainstream fact: Chinese dynasties, Central Asian Khanats, and Persian authorities all established checkpoints along the routes, each eager for its slice of tolls and tariffs. These stops provided security in theory, but in practice, they could feel like bureaucratic deserts more exhausting than the physical ones. By mid-morning, you reach a fortified outpost. Squat mud brick walls, a gate carved with faded patterns, and a guard in a felt cap leaning against a spear as if he has nowhere better to be. The caravan halts, and suddenly every merchant is a diplomat. Documents appear, letters of safe conduct, stamped seals, receipts from earlier tolls. The guard inspects them with exaggerated slowness, as though each crease and smudge might reveal a conspiracy. Quirky tidbit: some checkpoint officers were notorious for demanding gifts that ranged from exotic animals to jars of pickled fish. One record mentions a camel loaded with nothing but rosewater being commandeered for the official's daughter's wedding. Historians still argue whether such stories are exaggerated traveler grumbles or snapshots of the corruption baked into the system. Watching today's officer casually eye your wagon of porcelain, you suspect the truth lives somewhere between rumor and invoice. The leader of your caravan puts on his best grin, the one that has sold mediocre pepper as rarest spice of the Indies. He flatters the guard's mustache, praises the outpost's architecture, even invents a cousin who once married a woman from the same province. You stifle a laugh. Diplomacy here is less about treaties than about creative compliments. First joke, you whisper that if flattery were currency, this toll would be free, and the scribe beside you almost chokes trying not to snort. Eventually, the guard waves you through, after collecting an assortment of fees that seem to multiply like rabbits. A handful of coins here, a bolt of cloth there, a small jar of cinnamon tucked discreetly under his arm. It's annoying, yes, but also strangely reassuring. The road has rules, however inconvenient. Survival isn't just fighting the desert, it's knowing when to smile, nod, and hand over the cinnamon. Inside the outpost, you're offered water and shade. Traders sprawl under awnings. Scribes copy receipts onto brittle paper, and a boy sells roasted chickpeas that taste like smoky gravel but lift spirits anyway. You linger, grateful for walls even if they're cracked, grateful for order even if it costs too much. Mainstream fact again: These outposts not only taxed caravans, but served as hubs of information. Messages from distant capitals, rumors of wars, even gossip about rival caravans all funneled through the gate. You overhear one traveler warning that a bridge ahead has collapsed, another whispering about a bandit lord offering protection for a price. Historians still argue whether checkpoints genuinely improve safety or simply turn danger into an official tax, but for a weary traveler like you, both feel like part of the same contract. Nothing comes free, not even peace. Later, as you pass out of the gates, you look back at the guardhouse. The officer is already bargaining with another caravan, smiling faintly as though he's the desert itself, timeless and patient, collecting tolls while merchants come and go. Second joke, you mutter that he'll probably still be leaning on that spear when your grandchildren are old, and someone answers, if he hasn't raised the fee by then. The road resumes, dust curling around your ankles, but the checkpoint lingers in your mind. It wasn't the sand that tested you today, it was the negotiation, the slow dance of bribes and patience. Survival takes many shapes, you realize: water in a leather bag, shade from a stretched awning, and sometimes the ability to nod respectfully while someone counts your coins with suspiciously happy fingers. By afternoon, the desert swallows the outpost behind you, erasing walls as it erases footsteps. Yet you feel oddly lighter, not because you kept your goods, but because you passed another trial of the road. And tonight, when the stars return, you'll know that beyond thirst and storms, survival also means living through paperwork with your humor intact. Third joke arrives on cue. The parrot, who has been quiet all morning, suddenly croaks, "Pay up!" in a perfect imitation of the guard's tone. The whole caravan explodes with laughter, and for the first time all day, the toll feels like a bargain. The desert evening slides in with the softness of silk, a thin ribbon of pink stretched across the horizon. Your caravan settles into a grove of scrub trees, their twisted branches clawing upward like they've been praying for centuries. Tonight, you won't be trading coin or spices. Tonight, survival comes through ritual. Those small, careful habits that keep a wandering band from unraveling. You notice how, the moment the camels kneel, people fall into practiced motions as if pulled by invisible strings. Someone loosens girths, another checks hooves for cracked nails. Pots appear, fires spark, and suddenly the campsite is a tiny city with its own gravity. Mainstream fact. Historical records describe caravans organizing into precise routines at rest, often assigning tasks by role: guards, cooks, water fetchers, fire watchers. Without routine, confusion crept in, and confusion in the desert could be lethal. Quirky tidbit. Some caravan groups tied little bells not just to camels for the march, but also to water buckets at camp. If someone tried to sneak an extra sip at night, the bucket would tattle. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or a storyteller's joke, but when you hear a faint tink from the watering line, you can't help glancing around suspiciously. Dinner is a slow alchemy of lentils, rice, and dried apricots, the kind of meal that tastes like luxury after a day of grit. A boy stirs the pot with ceremonial seriousness, as though he's conducting a royal orchestra, instead of making slightly smoky porridge. First joke, you mutter that Gordon Ramsay would faint here, and the boy grins without knowing who Gordon Ramsay is, yet clearly understands the tone. After eating, people drift into their chosen distractions. Some mend ropes, humming songs their mothers sang. Others play dice carved from bone, their laughter rising like fire sparks. A healer dabs oil on a camel's sore knee, murmuring encouragement as if the animal were a stubborn uncle. And in a corner, a merchant carefully brushes dust from his abacus beads, treating each click as though the numbers themselves might bless the journey. Mainstream fact again. Music often accompanied these nights, not grand symphonies, but flutes, drums, or simple chanting. Some tunes were said to soothe animals, others to ward off the silence that pressed too close. Tonight, a shepherd pulls out a reed flute, coaxing notes that drift over the fire. They sound like questions with no hurry for answers. Historians still argue whether such tunes carried hidden codes, signals for sentries, warnings against thieves, or were simply lullabies for weary bones. You stretch out on your mat, watching constellations blink alive. The road has its own bedtime story, Orion tilting over Persia, the Dipper pouring light over Central Asia, Venus burning steady like a lantern nailed to the sky. Survival is not just about breath and pulse, it's about letting your mind rest enough to face tomorrow's march. Second joke comes with the parrot again. It waddles close to the fire, mimics the flute with a shrill squee, and then adds sweet pickles. The crowd erupts, and even the flute player chuckles through his teeth. The bird has become the unofficial guardian of morale. As the laughter ebbs, the rituals turn softer. A sentry ties a red cord between two posts to mark the night's boundary, daring thieves or wanderers to cross. Another sprinkles a few drops of wine onto the ground, a nod to the spirits of the road. You hear murmured prayers, some in Persian, some in Turkic, some in Sanskrit. It doesn't matter the language. Each voice is another stone in the circle wall against fear. Mainstream fact. Written accounts tell of caravans rotating night watch duty with strict precision, often using water clocks or candles marked in segments of time. Tonight, you see a candle already notched, its wax destined to measure the hours of safety. Historians still argue whether these systems were strictly observed or more symbolic. After all, who truly volunteers to wake at the coldest hour? Yet the rhythm of vigilance kept camps alive. Third joke, offered by an elder, floats into the hush. Once I forgot to notch the candle, and when it burned out, we all overslept. The camels were the only ones who stuck to schedule. They chewed my sandals. You check your own shoes reflexively, suddenly protective of their crunchy integrity. The fire cracks, sparks like tiny comets leaping skyward. Around you, bodies shift into slumber, bundled in cloaks, heads resting on saddlebags. The night is a shared invention, fragile and comforting. You close your eyes, listening to the creak of leather, the occasional grunt of a camel, the steady whistle of the flute now fading into silence. These rituals, tying knots, lighting candles, joking about sandals, seem small compared to dunes and storms. Yet you realize they are the real scaffolding of survival. The desert erases roads, but it cannot erase habits. And tonight, wrapped in the careful web of routine, you drift off knowing that tomorrow will begin exactly the same way, with camels kneeling, pots clattering, and someone joking that the bucket has tattled again. You notice it before you see it. The air changes. After weeks of dust that tastes like old pottery, something cool threads across your tongue. Wet clay, crushed reed, a breath as soft as a secret. The breeze carries a new grammar. Not the hiss of a sand against sand, but a hush with weight, like cloth laid over a table. You lift your head without meaning to. Everyone does. Even the camels tilt their noses, sniffing with unexpected elegance, critics appraising the bouquet of water. The line bunches as if pulled by a single string. Somewhere ahead, green interrupts the beige script of the world. First you catch it as a rumor, darker horizon, a smear, and then as fact, a belt of poplars, their leaves flashing silver, a fringe of tamarisk, reeds standing like a choir at attention. Your step finds spring it had no right to keep. The leader clicks his tongue for patience. No stampedes today. We've survived this long by walking, not rushing. You obey, though your throat is a child again, convinced that if you are very good you will be given a cup. The sound comes next. Not drums, not bells, but a polite collapse, again and again, water folding over stones. The camp goes quiet to hear it better, the way a market hushes for a poet. Mainstream fact, oasis belts in river valleys, strung along the Tarim, the Zarafshan, the Oxus, were kept alive by irrigation works older than the stories about them. Qanats, Koreas, tunneled groundwater to the surface, while Shadafs and counterweighted scoops lifted river water into channels fanning out through fields. You top a knuckle of dune and see it, a ditch bright as a blade, running between low banks to plots so green they feel scandalous. Men ride the sweep arms up and down, water swinging in arcs that flash like fish. A cluster of children appears on the path, curious and fearless, as children at river edges always are. One points at the parrot and shrieks. The bird preens, already auditioning for river celebrity. Women kneel at the bank, cloth stretched, palms beating rhythm, while bright scarves pin their hair against the breeze. A fisherman shakes a net so thin it's almost music, small silver bodies flickering like coins in sunlight. You are tempted to empty your purse just for the privilege of staring at the color blue for another hour. Quirky tidbit. At some rivers between steppe and city, ferrymen once floated cargo, and even people across on inflated goat or sheepskin bladders lashed beneath wicker frames. Humble life jackets that squeaked when you sat wrong and smelled like a barn, even after a weakened current. A boy in the bank holds up two glossy skins like trophies. The older men laugh and tousle his hair. You can't tell if he's practicing for work or for pranks. Either way, you make a note to test your balance before anyone asks you to ride a raft that bows if you poke it. The leader calls a halt, and the camp dissolves into joy disguised as procedure. Water skins off first, stoppered mouths unknotted with reverence, a sanctity usually reserved for scrolls. You kneel at the bank, cup a handful, and for a dangerous second, forget every rule about sipping. You gulp, choke, cough, and spray your dignity into the reeds. First joke. The parrot leans in with a clerk's prim authority and barks, "Sip, sip." You salute the bird and obey, letting the next mouthful sit on your tongue until your body remembers how to be human instead of kiln. Animals wade to their knees, then stop with religious exactness at the depth the drivers allow. The camels go still, eyes half closed, like monks remembering an old hymn. Horses paw and snort and finally accept that the river is not a rival but a bath. Someone splashes you. You pretend outrage. 5 seconds later, you splash back. Civilization returns one droplet at a time, on your hands, your face, under your scarf, where the desert had written its name in salt. The smell of green fattens as you follow the irrigation ditch toward the orchards. Mulberries stain the ground like spilt ink. Apricot trees hold little suns in their branches. In one field, rows of pale-leaved shrubs feed a low, constant rustle, silkworms murmuring their leafy arithmetic. You grin through a mouthful of fruit you absolutely paid for. You absolutely did not. The farmers wave anyway. Caravans bring silver and stories, and both are rain. Historians still argue whether technologies like the qanat traveled outward along the trade routes from the Iranian plateau or sprung up in parallel across drylands, a case of thirsty geniuses thinking alike. Either way, the evidence is here, humming under your feet, water moving where it should not move by itself, a quiet triumph older than any empire's banner. You walk beside a channel and feel a tugging in your chest you don't name until later. This is what mercy sounds like when it's engineered. At a shallow ford, the road breaks into braided paths, each with its own gossip of pebbles. Children herd ducks out of your way as if orchestrating a parade. Second joke, you bow gravely to the ducks and thank them for traffic control. A boy imitates your bow with such solemnity that even the leader snorts. The bridge beyond is nothing flamboyant. Poplar trunks, brush, a surface patched with planks that remember every cartwheel. But you cross, as if it were a marble span in a capital. The river slides under you, unbothered by titles. On the far bank, a mill turns, groaning confessions you can't quite make out. The miller tips his cap, flour dust ascending like benediction. Inside the yard, sacks of grain lean like sleepy men. A woman passes with a tray of flatbreads blistered in a tandoor, the scent winding fingers into your ribs and tugging hard. You consider spending the rest of your life within bread-smelling distance. The caravan leader reminds you that life, tragically, contains schedules. Unloading begins. The silk bales get a blessed rubdown. Porcelain crates are inspected like newborns. The spice sacks are resealed after a few too many curious fingers. One mule lies down and rolls until he is half pastry, half animal. The cook declares him mezza, and everyone applauds. You unlace your infamously crunchy socks and rinse them in an eddy. 5 beetles evacuate like passengers from a late coach. Third joke. You announce a memorial service for the departed tenants. Attendance is optional. Refreshments are river flavored. Someone throws a reed at you and calls it a laurel. With every chore, a weight you didn't notice lifts. Fear of the next well, the next wind, the next sly tax. There will be markets here, and arguments, and paperwork with edges that bite. But there will also be shade that stays where you leave it, and water that returns if you ask again, politely. A woman ties blue tassels into your camel's halter. The beast suffers the decoration with saintly boredom. You remember your vow back in the sand? If we ever reached a place like this, you'd retire the crocodile dunk sunscreen you never actually used. Consider it retired, ceremonially and forever. As dusk leans in, frogs begin their comic opera. Bats trade places with swallows. The poplars whisper the same line over and over until it stops being a word and becomes a pillow. A boy from the ferry runs past with a goat skin, and you laugh aloud at the squeak it makes. He laughs too, and the sound moves down the path like a lit candle. The leader walks the line one last time, touching loads, patting necks, counting without counting. Satisfied, he sits on a millstone and washes his hands slowly, as if rinsing the desert from his knuckles. You stretch your legs along the bank, back against a trunk that remembers rain better than you do. The river keeps riding without getting tired. You think of yardangs like fossil waves, of buttered ears and onioned eyes, of bells muffled under drifted snow, and of kites that maybe, possibly told the wind no. All of it narrows to this, cool breath on your cheeks and a promise threaded through it, valley, orchards, roofs, sleep that doesn't have to negotiate with sand. The parrot leans close and says, not unkindly, rest, for once you do as you're told the first time. You wake to river cool air and the scent of apricot wood smoke, and for a delicious instant you pretend the road ends here. Then the math taps your shoulder. Goods sold, goods bought, profits counted, and a long beige invoice called The Way Home, waiting to be paid in steps. Returning is the part no ballad sings about. You've traded silk for silver, spices for coin, coin for tools and paper, and a few vanity purchases you'll later call essentials. Court, now you must lash all of it back onto patient humps and carry your small victory through the same old furnace. The packing begins in reverse, like rewinding a noisy play. Porcelain crates are gone, good riddance to the clink, but in their place clatter hammered copper basins, indigo dyed cloth, and little pyramids of glass beads that try to escape at every jostle. A money changer counts out your silver by weight, snips a few crooked coins, and winks as if you should thank him for the service. Mainstream fact. On these routes, value often moved not only as metal, but as paper. Credit notes and letters of exchange that let merchants avoid lugging trunks of coin from oasis to oasis. In the Tang world, they nicknamed some of it Fei Qian, flying cash. Farther west, bills of exchange and sock did similar work, debt settling on ledgers where camels didn't have to go. Quirky tidbit. A few cautious traders stitched thin silver slivers into the hems of their robes. Secret jingles only they could hear when they walked. Historians still argue whether such hem hoards were common prudence or rare paranoia. But the tailor near the gate does brisk business reinforcing cuffs today, and you try not to look conspicuous. You choose what to carry as profit, what to carry as explanation, and what to carry as hope. For profit, rolls of fine paper and a chest of glassware that throws rainbow freckles onto anyone foolish enough to pass by. For explanation, a modest bundle of gifts, almonds for an uncle, a blue bead for a toddler who loves noisy things. For hope, a narrow scroll case that isn't yours to read, stamped with a seal and entrusted to you by a scribe who believes roads, like words, keep their promises. The caravan leader times your departure like a baker watching dough. Too soon and you chase the heat, too late and the passes lay ice traps. He mutters, dates, winds, moonrise. Mainstream fact. Many caravans aim to take high ground in late spring or early autumn, dodging both furnace and blizzard, commuting with the earth's more reasonable moods. Historians still argue whether most traders truly kept to seasons of mercy or were shoved across by urgent debt and impatient markets. Judging by the rival caravans' banners already winking at the far edge of town, at least one group believes in sprinting through foolish weather. You trade one last time before leaving, not goods but burdens. A banker's clerk with a face like a closed door offers, for a fee that could feed a city, to convert most of your coin to a letter of credit redeemable at a distant office. You touch your purse and feel its useless heaviness in the heat to come. You remember bandit dust on the horizon and the way a single pouch made your heart beat louder than a drum. The choice makes itself. You keep travel money and trade the rest for paper, signing your name with a reed pen that squeaks like a nervous mouse. Third joke of the morning. You tell the clerk that if the letter blows away in a sandstorm, you'll simply follow the paper trail. He does not laugh, but the parrot does. Follow, follow, which feels legally binding. Farewells taste like fruit with a bitter pit. The miller slips you bread still warm. A boy from the ferry hoists his goatskin raft and grins as if he's keeping the river on a leash. The woman who braided blue tassels into your camel's halter adjusts them again, the way mothers adjust scarves before doors. You promise to return and immediately wish you hadn't. It sounds like tempting the desert. Then again, your life is the loop. The road is both salary and sentence. Out on the flat, the city's green exhales behind you. The first dune rises like a raised eyebrow. The animals fall into their old metronome. Your feet find the groove they pretended to forget. The bell's small bilingual clink, part comfort, part command, stitches the line back together. You tuck the scroll case under your cloak where it won't bang against ribs. The parrot practices its portfolio of morale. Sip, sweet pickles, pay up. You vow that if the bird ever learns steady now, you'll give it half your almonds. The return has its own superstitions. The guide ties a different color thread on the lead rope. Outward journeys wore red, returns wear green, because it pleases somebody's grandfather and has never not worked. One driver smears a thumb of soot under each eye again, insurance against glare, or more truthfully, against forgetting we once survived glare. You fold your scarf just so, edge to nose, the way the healer showed you a tiny ritual that says, I belong to the living. At the first noon halt in open sand, the market's din feels like a dream you left half finished. The quiet has returned to set the terms. You sip, obeying the bird, and remember your inventory of desert absurdities. Buttered ears, onion-eyed storm cures, crocodile sunscreen retired with honor, beetle landlords evicted from crunchy socks, rhubarb the patron saint of unpleasant medicine. You add a new entry for the homeward leg, paper money that weighs nothing and everything at once. Historians still argue whether letters of credit truly reduced raids on merchants or simply invited a different species of fraud. Paper can be forged, steel can't, says the bow slung across a guard's back. You decide to believe in both paper and sharp-eyed friends. Night brings what it always brings. Stars, the hush, the lullabies that double as pedometers. Only now the melodies carry return words. Home, 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 like a low drum you barely hear but cannot ignore. Around the fire, the talk turns predictive. Soru, who will be there at the gate when you arrive? Which rival will spread which tale about your prices? How quickly does a house forget to smell like you? You tell them about the miller's flower blessing, the boy's squeaky raft, the woman's tassels. The stories come out like receipts, proof that the world was kinder than the road pretends. First joke of the night. You propose a temple to rhubarb, god of bitter outcomes avoided. The healer raises his bowl solemnly. The parrot pronounces rhubarb like a battle cry. Everyone agrees never to drink it again unless absolutely necessary. The route bends toward an older line of yardangs, where the wind carves sermons in stone. You pass a marker cairn you helped top earlier. Your pebble still on it if the desert didn't grade your homework away. It's gone, of course. The wind is an unforgiving teacher. You add a new stone anyway, a wink to any southbound stranger who will never know your name, but it might step more confidently because you walked here first. A courier gallops out of the darkness at dawn, all dust and impatience, and deposits a thin packet with the leader, updates on tolls due, a rumor of a bridge repaired, a note that a governor's mood has soured like old milk. Information is the only cargo that always outruns you. The leader reads, huffs, and adjusts your day's plan with a fingertip. Second joke of the day, you announce that if governors' moods were weather, you'd pack more umbrellas. The camel beside you sneezes agreement. As the sun climbs, your dread and your discipline walk side by side. You know what the road can do now. You also know what you can do back. Shake the boots, check the knots, count the sips, sing the steps, laugh at least once before noon, trade the heavy thing for the lighter promise. And when fear tries to growl like the old bandit dust, feed it an almond and a joke, because even fear gets bored of being serious. By twilight you have the rhythm again. That quiet pact with the sand will soften our voices if you soften your edges. In the last ember light, you lay your head on a saddlebag, filled not with porcelain but with paper and patience. The bell gives a single drowsy tuck. The parrot mutters rest in a tone that makes you suspect it was a monk in a previous life. You smile into your scarf and let the homeward road erase the city's noise in gentle strokes. Tomorrow will be dunes, the next day a well, and beyond that the past whose edge you have learned to respect. Home is out there, real and ridiculous, smelling like cooked millet and lamp smoke. The desert will not make it easy, but the desert never promised easy. Only a way through if you walk it properly. Morning comes with that thin, amber light that makes every dune look like a folded blanket, and you realize the road itself is tucking you in. The caravan rises slow, not with urgency now, but with a kind of weary grace, as though even the camels know the rhythm is nearly spent. The bells clink lazily, like spoons against porcelain after a meal. You step forward, not fast, not slow, just steady, and every sound seems softened, as if the desert itself is lowering its voice. The air tastes different this morning, a faint coolness sliding over your lips, promising higher passes ahead where snow waits even for summer travelers. You tug your scarf higher, but there is no dread in the gesture, only habit. The road has changed you. Fear has become rhythm, thirst has become instruction, silence has become a friend you carry like a well-filled gourd. Mainstream fact, caravans returning from the Silk Roads often carried news more precious than goods. Tales of markets, wars, or distant inventions that traveled faster in stories than in trade. Quirky tidbit, some merchants believed a final shout into the desert before leaving it would ensure their safe arrival home, as if the sand were a ledger that needed to be balanced. Historians still argue whether those shouts were ritual, superstition, or just a practical way to scare off jackals one last time. As evening paints the dunes in violet shadow, the fires burn quieter, smaller, gentler. There is no need for loud songs or competitive boasting. Instead, you hear soft humming, the clink of a cup, the steady munch of grain poured into a bag. Even the parrot seems subdued tonight, mumbling rest and home as if rehearsing for sleep. You look at the faces around you and see not exhaustion, but a kind of settled peace. You are not at the end yet, but you are close enough to believe in it. And so the wind down begins. Not in a hurry, but like a door quietly closing, hinge by hinge. The stars slide into their places as though they had been waiting for you all along. Your eyes trace their patterns, but your body only feels the weight of the ground beneath you, the soft insistence of rest pulling through your shoulders, down your spine, into the soles of your feet. You let your breaths lengthen, each one smoothing over the rough edges of the day. Inhale the faint scent of smoke. Exhale the long road. Inhale the hush of the desert. Exhale the clatter of markets left behind. Inhale the cool of night. Exhale the last hot gust of fear. The caravan blurs into a single shape. A long exhale across sand and stone. The bells hush themselves. The camels fold down into patient mounds. The fire sighs low. You too fold into the earth, no longer a traveler, simply someone who belongs here, where silence is thick and forgiving. Your eyes close, and even in that darkness, the road stretches, gentle now, not demanding. It tells you survived. You carried goods, yes, but also carried songs, laughter, and small absurdities that no ledger could measure. You brought yourself forward each step, and the desert, gruff but fair, allowed it. The last thing you hear is not the parrot, nor the bell, nor the wind, but the quiet hum of your own heart settling into stillness. You let it fade, slowly, softly, like ink sinking into paper, until only the faintest outline remains. Sleep comes, not like a sudden drop, but like sand slowly filling a footprint, steady, gentle, complete, and when morning comes again, it will carry you onward, but for now, you can rest.